But at some point I thought, okay, now I have to kind of start putting it into the world a little bit. And of course, I thought, there's a number of people that I need to talk to. Otherwise, the book is not, going to be very, very strong. And the first person on the list, of course, was Grover. And I thought, okay, how to get in touch with him. So I found out, his website, and there was a email address, the infamous info at that you never know where it's gonna go. And I sent an email just describing the project, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to approach it, and send. And I thought, okay, I don't even know if I'm ever gonna get an answer, who's gonna see this. You don't know. And less than 2 hours later, Grover replied himself and said, hey, let's chat one of these days, this, that day, blah, 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 boom. Okay. And I thought, wow, that to me, that was amazing. And then when the day came, in my mind, I was like, okay, I have to convince Grover that this project is serious because again, I'm not known as an author. I'm not known in the industry. I'm some guy wherever. I could have been a clown. You never know. So I said, I really have to convince Grover to get on board with this. Otherwise, pretty much my project, is going to be meaningless. And in my mind, it was almost, I was preparing the call, and to me, it was almost like a job interview. And I thought, okay, I gotta put across to him what I'm trying to do with the project. And the day comes, I called him up. What I thought was going to be a 10-minute pitch, try and convince him, turned into a 4-hour conversation, and which only ended because his battery died. And I hung up, and I was like, I was blown away. And that was the beginning of, many conversations and an amazing exchange with Grover, really. I was a big fan of his work until then. I'm a super big fan of the man today.
You're watching Guitar State with Alex Lopez.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Guitar State. I'm Alex Lopez. I'm here in the city of Los Angeles, and today I have the great pleasure to interview Christian Métraillaer, who is the editor, author of this amazing and masterpiece, the Jackson Charvel Japan, the Untold Story book, which I have the pleasure and privilege of having on my hands. I met Christian months ago. I think it was December when I found out that this book was released. I missed the boat. I didn't know about the release. Pat Campolitano from Jackson, I found out through him, and he connected me with Christian. So, Christian, I was saying behind cameras, thank you very much, number one, for helping me get in your book, this masterpiece. Second, you've been so nice when you send the book, just the wrapping itself. It was like, I used to own a gift shop, and I know what it takes to wrap a gift, and it's art when you know how to do it. And it was the thoughtfulness on shipping the book was amazing. And today you're here with us at Guitar Estate. So Christian, welcome to the channel, welcome to the episode. And for the people that are arriving to my channel, arriving to this episode, and arriving to the life of Christian, I would like you to introduce yourself, give us a little bit about your profile. And as I mentioned, let's pretend you and me met at the airport, and we're going to be talking about guitars, music, about your journey. How did you end up creating this amazing book?
Sure.
Welcome to the channel.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Means a lot. Thanks so much for having me. And I guess I'm going to start the episode by blushing with such an introduction. I mean, what am I supposed to do? So I always, I guess I'm still very sensitive to all the kind words I receive regularly. So it's very nice to be here. In a nutshell, as you said, I'm the author and publisher because it's a absolute private, one-man army kind of project. that I've put together. I'm based in France. I'm in the center of France in Vichy, but originally I'm half Swiss. I'm half Basque on my mother's side. I've lived in Switzerland. I was raised in Switzerland. I worked and lived in France, in the States, in Spain, just about everywhere. So I'm a kind of hybrid creature. And I guess in my day job, in my day life, I work in advertising. I worked for years as advertising film producer and post producer. But in my real life, I have this passion for guitars, and I've had a lifelong passion for Jackson and Charvel, and especially the Japanese models. And we might probably talk about that at some point or another.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you for sharing your profile, and I'm glad you shared this part. You said like I on my day life job,
mhm.
you
Yeah,
were in film, right? On the film industry, correct? On
yeah, yeah.
advertising,
Mhm.
and but we all have this other side, like guitars, music, and things that we're really passionate about. The same thing with me. I do real estate on my day life, but my passion and my music and what gets me going is this, like this the guitars, the music, the art, and that's why one of the reasons I created this channel. And today, to me, having you on the other side, having this conversation, believe me, it's like universe, thank you for connecting me with Christian, for connecting, getting this book, and things start, started to happening. So with people like yourself, because you kind of give us a little bit of background. You've been
Of course.
um, pretty much in different countries and different cultures and different environments. That I think, on my opinion, it's super important. When you have that opportunity to be in different parts of the world, because that helps you to grow. And you're like you say, you're hybrid. You adapt to any environment. So let's start from the beginning. At what age did it start this passion for music, this
Okay.
interest for music?
Well, it's funny because that's of course the very early origin story of the book. That was like many decades ago. As I said, I was raised in Switzerland. My family was not really, my parents were not really into music and stuff and whatnot. So I never really had a musical culture growing up. So I kind of, I had to find my own way and find my own music and stuff. And, in the beginning, um, I was born in 66. So, first contact with music was the 70s. And, back then it was disco, which I liked. I still do to this day, the Bee Gees and everything else. And I just kept listening to stuff on the radio and TV. Wasn't much rock and roll. And that's an interesting thing because in the US, especially, I think, rock and hard rock really is a part of mainstream culture and popular culture in a way.
Right.
Not so much in Europe, in most, at least, excepting maybe the UK, to some degree, Germany. But anyway, so I went looking for my music, and little by little, I heard stuff that was more and more on the rock side, like Pat Benatar and stuff like that, and Styx. And I thought, I didn't know what I was looking for, but every time I heard something that was a little bit rockier, heavier, I was drawn to that. Pat Benatar guitars, and it's like, oh, I like that. I didn't know what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the guitar sound, it was so. And little by little, at some point, I had a friend of mine introduced me one day to AC/DC, and I
Oh.
was like, okay, this is different. So I liked that, and for those about to rock and all of that stuff. And then one day he says, dude, you got to listen to this, and you're gonna love it. And he hands me Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast.
Oh, Iron Maiden.
And I look at the cover and I was like, whoa, this looks serious. And, of course, I was also into horror films and stuff. So it was all the same universe.
Right.
And I listened to it. And after 10 seconds, I was like, this
Hooked.
is my music, and that's why Maiden to this day is still a very big, band for me because it was my introduction to metal, and it's been a lifetime. So that was the introduction to guitars and everything.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yep, go
What
ahead.
age were you?
So that, in 1980, I was what, 14, 15,
You were kind
that
of
was my,
like in high school, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So my first introduction to rock and metal was really the new wave of British heavy
British
metal
heavy metal.
first, Maiden, Judas Priest, and Saxon, and all
Okay.
those bands.
Now, what was the name of your friend? Because that friend changed your game.
Um,
You know,
I can't remember. It
bringing
was a
that
guy.
music. You know, introducing you
Yeah,
to. We always have that friend. You know, that friend that
yeah.
help you. You know, it happened
Well,
to
it
me
was a
when I
guy in
was at the
Spain,
beginning.
actually, because I was raised in Switzerland, but I would spend all my summer holidays in Spain. So he
Okay.
was one of my summer friends,
Oh, okay.
and that was it. I couldn't remember his name for my life now, but so that
Understandable. I mean, you've been all over, so too many people
yeah.
that you met throughout your life.
And then the interesting thing, just to close on that bit of the origin story, is as I said, being a metalhead in the very early 80s in my town in Switzerland wasn't really mainstream and stuff. Like the decent record stores didn't have metal albums. And also, it was a bit of a, and, younger generations today don't realize, we didn't have YouTube, internet, any of that. So we really did not have a lot of information on the bands or what they looked like or the
Right.
guitars they played or anything. And in 1984 was my first time I went to the US as an exchange student for a year, 1984, and in on Long Island in New York, and I discovered all the magazines, Circus, Hit Parader, and
Right.
Faces, all of that. I discovered MTV. I discovered the all those videos, and I think probably the first Charvel I ever saw was Warren DeMartini in the Round and Round video.
Oh,
And all
okay.
of a sudden, you saw the guitars that these people played, and I saw that guitar, with a little guitar shaped logo thing, and it was like,
Right.
oh,
Sorry, so right there on the guitar logo, was it the toothpaste logo, the Charvel toothpaste logo, or
no,
just?
it was the
Oh,
American guitar shaped logo with the 3x3 headstock.
right, right. Okay. How old were you again when you came to the
So that was 84, so I must have been what, 18?
Man, I can imagine, your reaction being here in the States for the first time and being having access, to the magazines, to the
Yeah,
records, to the guitar stores.
yeah.
The first time I came from Ecuador, and the first time I came here I was 11 years old. I came for
Mhm,
10 days with a
mhm,
mission, which was magazines,
yeah,
records. My friends made a list of 100 records to bring. I didn't have any money. How am I going to buy any
yeah,
records? But it was just when you mentioned Hit Parader and there was the Rip magazine, there was so many magazines just to see the
yeah,
the magazines like next
yeah,
to you. It was like an experience. And I'm
yeah,
glad you went to
absolutely.
New York. I went to New York too. So
Yeah. So that was really cool. So that was my introduction, and of course, back then I was a student, adolescent, whatever. Owning a U.S. custom shop was not even a dream. It was just another universe. So when the Japanese series came out, all of a sudden it was like, oh wow, this is interesting. And mind you, those were great. They weren't exactly affordable because back in those years, the dollar was extremely strong
mhm.
versus now. So those guitars, even the Japanese ones, were not so affordable. But it turns out I purchased my first guitar, which was a Charvel Model 6
Wow,
at Sam Ash in New York City.
that's awesome.
And it was like, and that started it all, really.
Man, you just mentioned the Model 6 guitar. That's my favorite. That's my favorite, the Model 6 guitars. And just having this conversation with you about Charvel and Jackson, and you mentioning, I always say this, I'm a guitar collector. I have different brands and, done a little bit of everything. But when people ask me, what's your favorite guitar? Like what brand? And I gotta go with Jackson and Charvel because they're sexier, they're metal, they're more like they have more attitude. That logo,
Yeah.
that the whole thing. My favorite Charvel logo is the toothpaste logo. I
Mhm.
really like that. That's my favorite. But now that you mentioned the Model 6 guitar, It's great, you know. Like I have
Mhm.
three of them. My goal is to have the all the colors. I
All
think
the
it's five or
colors.
six
Yeah.
colors, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, so you bought
So
the
an
model.
interesting thing, sorry to interrupt, the interesting thing about the Model 6 is, I mean, back in the day, I was young, a bit dumb and ignorant. I didn't know really anything about guitars. I just knew I wanted the Legend, and they had the Model 1 and 2 and blah and blah and blah. But I wanted the 6 because back in the day, the word on the street was that the Model 6 was essentially the same as a Jackson soloist,
Right.
except made in Japan. And of course, that meant roughly, from what I remember, that the Model 6 cost half the price of the US Jackson soloist. So I was like, that's the one.
And you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm glad look. It feels like we're gonna be talking about guitars all day because there's so much to talk about. But when you mentioned, the comparison, you're right about that. That's a fact that the Model Six, it's compared to the Jackson Soloist made in the US, and it's exactly the same thing. I mentioned a little bit behind cameras, we were talking about some of the luthiers, and one of them was Mike Shannon. They made this the 30th anniversary release, I think in 2014, when they released the Jackson Soloist again. And you know the particular the thing that this guitar has the three the switches. That's
Yeah,
what makes those guitars unique, because that's what makes the difference in right through in the whole thing. What color was yours?
mine was black.
Awesome. So, and you were into uh like new British heavy metal bands, right?
Well, my musical path started again with the 80s new wave of British heavy metal. Then coming to the States, strangely enough, I discovered older stuff from the 70s, the Led Zeppelin and the even Black Sabbath and Jimi Hendrix, and which I'd never really heard when I was growing up in Switzerland. So I got that lesson in history first of all, and then of course again 1984, 1985, whatever, the Sunset Strip, all the craziness, and I was like a kid in the candy store. I was like, that was amazing.
Look, you mentioned the 80s, when things were happening, especially, 1984, 85, 86, great records were recorded. Of course, the 70s has its own thing, but the 80s is when the whole thing with thrash metal and, all these bands that were brewing here in LA, Metallica, one of them, Slayer, and I mentioned also Anthrax. Scotty on plays with Jackson. But anyway, let's go back to New York. Did you buy it on the 48th Street?
Yep.
What the store?
After many trips, because I mean, I was going to the first year I was in the US as an exchange student. I didn't want to be in a language school, so I wanted to be really in, the environment.
Right.
So I spent a year, 84, 85, as an exchange student in high school. So academically, back in Switzerland, I was already beyond that, but it was just a way of being in an environment with,
Right.
Americans and whatnot. And it was really funny because before I left, I think I had quite a good level of English.
Hmm.
When I got to that high school environment on Long Island, I think for the first 3 months, I didn't understand anything that anyone was saying because it was the street slang. And at first I was like, this doesn't sound like anything I've heard so far.
Right.
But I picked it up quite quickly. And I got into the crowd pretty quickly because back in those days in I guess any high school, you pretty much had three different crowds. You had like the kind of preppy girls and the dance stuff. You had the break dancing back in the day crowd, which was mostly Asians and African Americans,
Right.
and then you had the metalheads.
Right.
Guess who I joined?
Metalheads. That's
You
awesome.
know,
Man, I can imagine, being part of that genre, that crowd, the
Mhm.
80s, being in high school in New York. Um, And you've been on the 48th Street in New York, the way all these stores.
Mm.
There was Manny's was there, Samash
Yeah,
was there, the ESP store was
48th Street
there.
Custom. Yeah.
And for the people that been in Japan, it's kind of like the guitar district in Japan, the way it is. That's how New York was back in the
Mm.
day, and
Yeah.
you were fortunate, to get there. What was the feeling when you bought that M6 model?
Well, as I said, then I was going to college on Long Island as well, but I would take the train, go to New York, and spend time on 48th Street, going back and forth, just looking at all the stuff that I never thought I could afford ever, and back in the day, I mean, the street for vintage stuff, there was also Rudy's,
Rudy's.
uh, Pensasur had also, I think it was on the first floor, it might have been above Rudy's. I can't remember exactly, but he had a shop there. So I would look at all these things, and you know how it is. You go to music stores, you don't have a lot of money, you buy a pick, you buy a pack of strings, just a little something to.
Right.
And then one day I thought, okay, I want my Model 6, I want my Model 6, and I ordered it. And then, they called me in, and I took it with the chainsaw case and stuff. And I remember the day um, when I went to pick it up. I mean, Samash in New York was pretty much like a long hallway. It wasn't like a big space,
Right.
whatever. It was pretty much.
Hmm.
And so I had to wait. We had to wait in line sometimes for stuff. And there was a kid right in front of me. His parents were with him and obviously buying him a Jackson soloist, a white one, for whatever graduation, whatever it may have been. And the guy was sitting down, and I will never forget the look on his face playing that guitar. It to him at that moment in time, it was better than sex. And I looked at him and I thought, he's gonna be happy with that guitar. And I was waiting for mine, and I got mine. And I remember I sucked pretty much at guitar back then. Uh, some I think I still do, but at the time I remember because I had learned to play on a friend's guitar, which was like many of us in the 80s, which was an Aria Pro 2.
Okay, I'm glad you
And I
mentioned Aria. I'm glad you.
and I remember thinking, wow, and what I forgot to mention when I was a kid back in Switzerland, I started on classical guitar. So I learned electric on that other guitar, and I thought it was kind of difficult, and it felt kind of stiff and whatnot. And then when I first touched my Model 6, it was like that thing was so easy to play. And what I say is, good gear doesn't make you a better player, but it allows you to bring the best that you're able to do at a certain point in time.
Hmm.
And that was it with that guitar. It just felt amazing. So, and that was my main guitar for a few years.
Sorry to interrupt you. Key point
Yeah.
that you're mentioning right now, especially for guitar players, shredders, all these you know fans that they're really into the instrument. You mentioned two key things here. Aria Pro, which
Mhm.
was like kind of like alternative brand, because it was more affordable, right? The Arias were more affordable, whatever was on the market, and everybody knows that Aria Pro, was the company that did the bass for Cliff Burton, and he
Mhm.
made that brand famous, with the Master of Puppets, but that you said that you learned to play guitar with that instrument, and you did feel the difference at some point
Yeah,
having the
absolutely.
the Charvel, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of people, guitar players that say, oh, it doesn't matter what instrument you play, it's you, but I don't think it's, I mean, I think the instrument makes a difference. If you're a
Yeah.
great player, you're going
Mhm.
to be greater if you have a better instrument.
Yeah, and as I said, at the time, I really didn't know anything about anything. So like neck profiles, all that, I had no clue about any of that. So
Like,
it was really instinct of saying, wow, this guitar is like really much easier to play. And funny story is, when I got back to Europe a few years later, I think it was in 94, um, I purchased my second guitar, which was a 1990 Jackson Fusion Pro from Japan, from the first legendary series of pro guitars they made. And I was able, it came in that color, which was kind of like acid yellow with an orange burst, which was kind of, meh, you know. Um, and the guitar had been sitting in a store for 4 years, probably because of the color. So I managed to get a super deal on the guitar, and I knew I was going to get it refinished, and I did get it refinished in transparent blue eventually. And that guitar being a Fusion, the scale on that is 24 and 3/4
Okay.
versus 25/5 for the soloist.
Hmm.
And I noticed it was so much easier to play to the point where it became my favorite guitar. Now, at that time, again, I had no idea what scale length was, what it did. I didn't understand any of the technical stuff, but I could feel it was much easier to play. So it became my main guitar. So things like that. So yeah, I mean, there's things you can feel. And also, for those of us who learned to play in the 80s, um, there really was no such thing as a good, affordable guitar. I mean, today, whatever, there's such a plethora of brands of stuff, and you can get a
Right.
really, really nice guitar, even for less than $300, like a very playable and very enjoyable guitar. That in the 80s did not exist,
You know
you know?
what? Another key fact that you're sharing, because it's true. In
Mhm.
the 80s, there was this standard or level on the instruments that they were not like today. You walk into guitar centers, guitars from 100, 200, $300, very affordable. And there's all these other alternatives that you have, on the internet, buying in different parts of the world. But back then, it was like you needed
Yeah,
to have certain budget to
yeah,
be able to buy, but you were getting a great instrument. Like
yeah.
the level of the instruments were.
That changed a lot. I mean, a couple of years ago, I've always been a Superstrat guy. I love pointies, but for other people, for me, I'm not comfortable with them, and I just like Superstrats. That's what it is. And as you said, not all of them, because there are other iconic Superstrats brands that I just don't gel with. And I think over the years I've thought about it, and I think it's probably the very first good gear that you have in your life shapes your taste for the rest of your life. I really think that. Maybe not the beginner instruments, but when you get like a really good guitar, whatever, that is probably your reference for life, I
Yeah,
think.
I
And
think
for me,
it becomes part of your personality, part of who you
mhm,
are, the
mhm,
instrument that you pick. Like
yeah,
this is it's kind of it becomes part of you.
yeah,
Whatever model or
mhm,
type of
of
guitar,
course.
how you feel comfortable, and it's hard to change because it doesn't feel right. I mean, I
Yeah.
have tried some other models that just because so and so was playing it, and it feels kind of like, to me it happened with the BC Ridge, the Warlock. I
Hmm.
always wanted,
Hmm.
that guitar,
Yeah.
Max Cavalera from Sepultura or
Mhm.
uh, Blackie Lawless. I think he had the Warlock shape.
Mhm. Yeah,
And when I got it and it started playing, it was like, what is it? Like, I don't know. I couldn't feel it. But
yeah, yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
um, closing this New York chapter and coming to the U.S., what was the first concert that you attended in New York or in the U.S.? First
That
concert.
that the very first one was um during my first year as an exchange student. So I don't know if it was like late 84, early 85. I might have that somewhere. And there was the famous rock club, Lemoore in Brooklyn.
Oh, okay.
And then they opened another club that was further out in the island that was Lemoore East. And around that time, whatever, 84, 85, they opened a third club further down in the island, which was Lemoore Far East. And somehow, through the grapevine, there's a rumor that reached me that at the inauguration of Lemoore Far East, there was going to be a famous band. Well, actually, yeah, it must have been 85, I guess. Um, but we didn't know. And then rumor had it that that famous band could be Queensryche.
Oh,
And I
okay.
remember I was with my buddy and we thought, Queensryche? Nah. And I was like, what if it is true? And and then we thought, okay, screw it. We'll go. Worst comes to worst, it's some, local band, whatever. We'll have a good time, and that's the end of that, whatever. So we get there, and probably 250 people in the club, sort of. We get right up the stage. The stage is just like basically a big block of things, and it's just, and it's Queensryche, and they played the Rage for Order. That's the album had come out, and it probably was give or take a few months or whatever, but that's, I forget exactly what year Rage for Order came out, but that must have been around that time. And it was just like, I mean, literally within arm's length, Queensryche on stage. I was like, you
Right.
know. So that was my first concert in the States.
Man, I love those shows, small clubs that you like right in front of the
Yeah,
proximity is. I really like those type of shows, like, small bars, small
yeah.
venues where a small crowd, but the energy, and I'm glad, you experienced your first concert with one of those. So that was,
And they were beginning to get famous too. It was that moment when they were like literally, shooting stars. And it was just amazing. And in fact, it was like maybe a year later, I saw, I think that one was in Lemoore, Brooklyn. I saw Ingve with Joel Turner. It was the Odyssey album time, whatever, and that was also a small club thing. And I still, just the other day, I found a few pictures of that. Everybody looks so young, it's like
right.
Ingve, Ingve looks like a kid, and it's like, wow,
You
that
know,
was intense.
and a full privilege that you were part of that. You're part of
Mm.
that age group. That on the '80s, were like you said, bands that became big. They were
Yeah.
kind of like forming, creating themselves, and you were part of that crowd. So that's
Yeah.
that's, that's awesome, man. Okay,
And on the other end of the spectrum, the biggest concert I saw was I just uploaded a ticket stump the other day that I found. That apparently the guys at Metallica are doing, like, if you have like old ticket stubs or whatever, just send them over so they get money.
right,
So, and I found it. It was like from March 1989, Nassau Coliseum in New Jersey, Metallica, the Injustice for All tour with Queensryche opening up. And that was a big concert, but man, I remember the bleachers are all concrete and stuff. At some point, I mean, it was just so happening. Everybody was jumping together, and you could feel the concrete pulsating. And I remember thinking, man, if this gives, we're all dead. You know,
right.
and at the end they had the big wall of, you know, um, whatever polystyrene blocks or whatever, and they destroyed the wall from Injustice for All. And I mean, it was an amazing, amazing show.
No,
So I really had both experiences, the mega show and
mega
the
show
little
and the
club
small
thing.
club.
Yeah.
Look, being on that concert on the Justice for All tour, I only seen that thing, on YouTube, and being there, it's like you say, I saw the Beatles, like very few people can say that, and very few people can say I was, the Justice
Yeah.
for All tour. I'm a big Metallica fan. I'm seen them many many times, but definitely. Um, I prefer small venues for whatever show because
Yeah.
it's more intimate. I like them better. I don't like big venues. All right. So you've been working. Okay, closing to this, the New York chapter, the 48 district, that is gone.
It's gone.
It's
Yeah.
gone forever, and now
Mm.
it's a lot of real estate going on there. And as we know, Samash went out of business.
Mm.
Um, What else? Manny's legendary store was there.
Mm.
Um, and all these iconic stores, just very few still in business. Rudy's is one of them. He has one in Soho, and the other one, the store where he's at, I think is on Long Island. I wanted to go. I was in New York in August last year, and it was a lot of nostalgia. You know, to me, like my first instrument I bought at Manis was an
Mhm.
Ibanez bass. And when you were telling me the story about you were in Samash in line waiting for
Mhm.
your guitar, and you see this kid,
Yeah.
you know, with the white soloist guitar. That's what an instrument does, especially when you know when you're like really doing everything you can to obtain that instrument. Remember the layaway plans?
I actually, being a foreigner and whatnot, I purchased the guitar cash, and that
Yeah.
was it. So,
Yeah. Yeah, mine, I
pretty.
bought it layaway. I was like 3 months. I was working and paying it. But anyway, my question is, what are your thoughts of like that district gone, being gone? Where do you think? I know there's the boutique guitar shops, you know,
Mm-mm,
all over the world,
mm-mm.
and, you know, but that that whole district is gone,
Yeah,
where a lot of history happened there.
yeah. Well, me personally, I feel sad about it because it's part of my emotional story and history that is just doesn't exist anymore. So, it's one of those things that on a rainy day makes you feel like a dinosaur because you think, geez, stuff that meant stuff to me and that existed is just doesn't exist anymore. And, as time goes, people will just forget about it. And the thing is, once you forget about something, it's like it never existed, which is one of the many reasons behind my book project as well. This kind of notion that I think for every generation to look back at a time when you were younger and think, oh, it was so cool, and having this nostalgia, that happens to every generation. But I do think, and from my discussions around the book and talking to Grover and all these guys, I really have a feeling that the '80s were a very special decade for like all sorts of arts, and you could even say, even television or music or art or painting or I think '80s, and you can think many things. To me, '80s, I think Pat Nagel, I think Miami Vice, I
Hmm.
think the Sunset Strip. It's all a universe, but you had super mega stars like like Madonna, like Prince, like figures like that, which you don't really have, not at least in that sense anymore. You had these musicians in all different styles that were amazing. You know, I was in the US and I saw in the theater the premiere of Purple Rain. It's like it's that moment in time, you know,
Right.
and also I feel that all these personalities and were so strong and so amazing artistically that there was probably a lot more of overlapping kind of tastes. Back when I was growing up, you could be a metalhead and love Depeche Mode or whatever, or different types, different genres, I guess, of music. And it didn't feel weird just because those artists were amazing. And I mean, a lot of metalheads went bunkers when Purple Rain came out, and it's not, it's not metal, but there was something so gripping in the music. And I think, and also in regards to the music industry conversations I've had with Grover about the way it was in the '80s and how it changed at the end of the '80s, where everything was still very much very dynamic, very crazy. The hairstyles were crazy, the makeup was crazy, the cars were crazy, everything was kind of over the edge,
Right.
but there was a sort of joy or carefree kind of feeling that it was like a giant explosion of creativity.
Yeah.
And then of course things changed,
You know,
but
that's a right word that you use, explosion, because there was like explosions everywhere in different styles and
yeah.
different, and like you mentioned at the beginning of this part, art, music. There
Mhm.
was a lot of things going on, and I think it's like I don't think, well, it's nostalgia, but at the same
Mhm.
time, like, I'm not saying, I always say this, I'm not trying to talk down about the artists of today's that we have, but definitely in the 70s, in the 80s. I mean, I don't see a new Led Zeppelin, I don't see a new Metallica. Those are like bands, or Prince or Madonna. There's these artists that existed once.
Mhm.
I'm 47, turning 48 in 10 days. And I've been saying this like repetitively, like many times lately, like, I'm glad that I live in
Mhm.
this era, because
Mhm.
I don't know what the future holds for the younger generations.
Yeah.
So, but I'm glad you're part of it, and I know I'm younger than you, but having a conversation with someone that actually lived those events, it's great, man. I really appreciate your time. I really enjoy your
Yeah, well,
time.
it's a special feeling. And I think back to your question about music, bro, the world changed. The way, people produce music changed. The way people consume music changed. There's streaming, and there's now such a multiplication of channels for music, for information, for stuff. It's as always, it has the good side and the bad side. The good side is you can be in your bedroom and become, a star guitar player, at least in a certain category, whatever, whatever, which was impossible back in the 80s. You can record your own album with, minimal equipment at home. There's a lot of things that, but at the same time, there's now just so much that in fact, it gets more difficult for new musicians to come out. The type of, obviously, there's no real money in music for artists anymore. So that has changed as well. I mean, even big name brands are struggling because they make no money on the road or selling records, whatnot. So the whole music universe has changed. And I think it's part of it, with the good and the bad sides. For
Right.
people like me, it's like I feel a bit sad about it because I think we've lost something that was meaningful. Um,
Look, just talking about that, like you mentioned, right? Your ticket, the ticket you uploaded on the Metallica website that was at this Nassau Coliseum. Do you remember how much was that ticket?
$17.
Look, to see Metallica nowadays,
Mm,
decent, decent, it's like $1,000 at
yeah.
least. And I've seen it many times. I'm a guitar collector. I have a few of James Hetfield's,
Mm-mm,
guitars. And there's this a community of guitar collectors and Metallica fans.
mm-mm,
And look, the shows for the Vegas Dome
mm-mm.
show, they were insanely expensive.
Yeah.
2000, 1800, $2,300. And I'm like, where is this going? I mean, you
Well,
know,
the sad thing is, it's not even most of it is not going to the artist. I mean, we won't name names, but there's a whole
exactly.
industry of,
Right.
let's say, tour
You
management.
you can say it. I'll say it.
Well,
Yeah,
you know,
because look, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm glad you mentioned that part too. A lot of people think it's the artist,
yeah.
but but it's like, I know it's not the artist, but to the artist, what are you doing to stop this?
Mm-mm.
Because it's like, I'm a huge Metallica fan, but this time I was like, I'd rather travel with that money. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to spend. My friend sent me the tickets. He bought three. And he's
Mm-mm.
like, hey man, I had an extra one. It was $2,300 ticket to be
Yeah.
not even on the snake pit,
Yeah.
outside of the snake pit.
Mm-mm.
So I was like, this is getting out of hand, like, and and
Well,
and,
I mean,
and the funny thing, sold out.
yeah,
Everything
of
was
course,
sold out.
of course, and some tickets will be scalped and whatever,
Right.
But on the other hand, I haven't been to a show in years, actually. I think probably the last show I saw must have been 10, 12 years ago in Paris, and it was a Finnish melodic death band, Insomnium. It was great. But one of the things I don't like about modern music, and I'm gonna sound like a old fart, but being I think the metal crowd has changed as well from where I was going to the shows in like 83, 84, 85, those years. There was a real sense of community and not to sound silly, but a sort of brotherhood, in metal and stuff, and people were there to enjoy the shows. And back in those days, if you were caught at a show, with like one of those small Kodak Instamatic thing that had a little cartridge, that you went click, 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 click. You were caught with one of those, you were expelled, and that was the end of it. You were caught with a cassette recording thing, and you were expelled. That was it. You go to a show now, and I've always liked to be kind of close up, and you're, 20, 30 feet from the stage, and all you see is a forest of smartphones. And it's like, what the hell? That's not what live music is for. So this sense of, back when I was growing up, you purchased the ticket for a show, you waited 9 months or whatever, you counted the days, you went to the show, and it meant something because, either you were at the show or you weren't. And that was that. And there was a sense you were there, you were singing, you were jumping, you were 200% with the artist on stage. And I think now with this thing of everybody, and I understand, okay, take a couple of pictures, blah, 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 but it's at some point a live show, you're there to kind of communicate with the artist, not to look at the whole thing through your phone, because then why do you even bother going to the show? So I think it's really interesting that some bands recently, like Maiden, like Ghost, are saying, guys, keep your phones in your pocket and that's it. And I think even the younger generations who have a tendency to bitch about that, once they know that experience, I'm hoping they will kind of reconnect with the live experience and just forget about the phone, forget about the blah, 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 and be in the moment. I think that's really important. And in fact, in June, I'm going to see Maiden in Paris, a brand new
Venue?
venue that I didn't know it was built after I left Paris. Supposedly, from what I know, it's like the biggest venue in the whole of Europe. And of course, it's the 50th anniversary. And to me, it's kind of, I thought, okay, usually I would be in the snake pit, like right in front of the stage. And I'm thinking, am I physically able to take 2 hours? So it's like, okay, so I took like a VIP kind of bleacher thing, front of the stage, whatnot. But my first concert ever was Iron Maiden in 1983. So it's like, it's this feeling of like, okay, I'm not saying this will be my last, but you see, it's like it's a lifetime with this band.
Right.
And, it was like one of the VIP tickets, and I paid, I think 180 euros, which
Not bad. Not bad
not
at
bad.
all. 100
I
and
mean,
for a
considering the
VIP
show
ticket.
they put on, it's
Right.
like, okay. And, it's 50 years and it's now and it's never going to be coming back again. So,
You know what? The funny thing, I like having this conversation with you, man, because there's so many things that we have in common. One of them, I never seen Iron Maiden, and I have the ticket to see them here in LA in September because,
mm,
and I was like, I never seen Iron Maiden live. And when I was the second time I came to the US was in 1996 to 1998. I had tickets to see them in New Jersey or it was in New York. I don't remember, but I couldn't go. So I always was like, man, I miss Iron Maiden. And I have this friend of mine from Mexico. So he's like, hey, man, I'm coming to see Iron Maiden. And he's like, let's go, let's go. I was like, okay, let's do it. And I'm
yeah,
glad, that you're going to see them in Paris. I will see them here. It's for the
yeah,
50th anniversary. But closing this thing about
mhm,
the tickets, I agree 100% with you about the phone experience because it's becoming annoying. That I'm a short guy, and my biggest challenge when you're on the floor is like a taller guy is in front of you. But now it's not that. There's the wall of smartphones that they are doing live
yeah,
recordings, And I
Yeah.
understand, like you said, the picture and this and that. But it's same thing. Got out of hand. Artists are doing the what they can. Some artists that they get
Mhm.
really upset, and some concerts. Last year I went to a concert here in LA that they asked you to put the phone in this
Mhm.
little bag.
Mhm.
And you know what? The funny thing, it took me back to the 90s, which
Yeah.
you are next to someone and you start talking to that person
Yeah.
because there's nothing to do. And you
But
start,
yeah, yeah. I think, again, not to sound like an old fart, but I think a live show is a little bit, it's a coming together. It's obviously it's not religious, but it's a little bit like a prayer. And the essence of it come from like a whole bunch of people coming together, focusing together, I think, at the same time, on the music, on the players, and that's when a show becomes like really, really powerful. And that when you're in the moment and you're focused on the band and not on, oh, is the sound good? Is blah, 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 and I think that's one of the things that overall technology, um, it's one of the bad sides of technology. I think it kind of shuts off, as you were saying, that human experience of like you're at a show, it's like okay, and you talk to people and you just enjoy the show and you're in the moment. I think that's very important, even beyond music. And that's an entire other subject. But I think being focused in the moment all together on something, that is super powerful.
yeah.
And, and I think even for the artist, you're on stage, it's like you'd rather see guys, like looking at you and singing and blah and blah and blah than, the stupid phone and, trying to get a good angle. So,
They get annoyed. They get annoyed. And but unfortunately, those are the time.
yep.
Anyway, now let's go straight to the point. The break, the book. Because we can be here talking about
Oh,
all this great
absolutely.
stuff all day. Um, Now, so you've been on the advertising business for 35 years. What motivated you to create this book?
Um, Well, on the one hand, and I think this long, lengthy introduction about things does explain some of the things that led to the book. It really started, um, in a sense, out of desperation. I've had this passion for years. I've over the years, I've become very much interested, specifically for some reason, in the Japanese guitar industry, mostly of the 80s, a little bit of the 70s, but mostly of the 80s. Different, I mean, it's an absolutely fascinating universe. And I think both in the US and in Japan, the decade of the 80s, and as far as the development of the guitar industry is just, an amazing period. So I started trying to find information, doing research. What always frustrated me is there's pretty much zero bibliography on that decade. I mean, there are a couple of books. There's a couple of books on Ibanez. There's the Hamer book. There's a couple of them, but there's essentially nothing. To this day, nothing on, there was nothing on Jackson Charvel. There's nothing on ESP. There is what I think will be a huge, huge, huge book on BC Rich. I'm in touch with the guy who's writing it. I've seen a few things. I think it's going to be, a historical piece of work. But I was always frustrated because, and of course, that era of the 80s is before the internet. So for a few years, the Charvel community knows there was this website hosted by a guy in Denmark, Henrik, with audiozone.dk, which was a great website in everything, Charvel Japan. The website shut down three or 4 years ago now, I think. And I was in touch with Henrik, and I said, do you can I help? Can we collaborate? Can we revive the website? And I think he just was done with it, which I understand. So there was nothing on the internet as well, really, as far as history. So there was that frustration. And then, of course, in my day life, uh, I was doing really well. March 2020 happened, And from one day to the next, I had zero work, zero income, and it was pretty much a shit show for almost 2.5 years. And stuff like that happens, and you think, okay, I can either sit on my butt and whine all day and complain about the world and whatever else, or I can try to focus on other things. And I started working on guitars, repairing guitars, restoring Japanese guitars, etc., etc. Doing some research. I spent some time on the Charvel Jackson Facebook pages, and there's a lot of interaction. There's always people saying, "Oh, what's this guitar? How much is it worth? What's the model? This and that." Okay. And there's also a lot of people who ask, very genuine questions about things and uh, about the history and stuff. As always, that's one of the evils of the interwebs. Um, Somebody somewhere at some point said something stupid, and it gets repeated, copy pasted, and after a few years, it's like dogma.
Exactly.
And so, there's a lot of wrong information and stuff. And so I started interacting with people, and I got some, private messages, people saying, "Oh, you seem to know a lot of stuff about this." I never thought of, you never think about it yourself, "Oh, I know a lot of stuff about it." So, and I thought, okay. And then one day just hit me, and I thought, okay, there's no bibliography. There's really nothing on the internet. So all of this history lives in living memory of people, either collectors or passionate, fans like myself, or the guys who, were there and did it. And it just hit me that at some point, all of that was going to disappear. And I thought, to me, that blew my mind. I thought that can't just all disappear and be forgotten. So that was the starting point of the book when I thought, okay, um,
What
am
year
I
was
going to
this?
create?
2020?
That was spring of 2020. And I thought, okay, am I going to build a website? Which I did for different things. The website I build is more for an archive for all the catalogs and all the things, which is another thing. A lot of the catalogs online, you have always the same, handful of catalogs. They're scanned at 3 dpi with a potato, so you can't even see what the guitars look like. And I thought, okay, that has to change. So I started collecting catalogs and putting them on my website for archival purposes, because that was not going to be in the book. And then, I started working in my little bubble on the book, trying to figure out what to do. And mind you, I had um, in the beginning, I knew for budget reasons, obviously, because precisely that was like a really, really bad moment, um, which I also think helps. It's, when everything's fine and you're comfortable, maybe you're just not going to, launch a crazy project and do something like this. You have to be in a bit of a difficult situation, maybe to just say, hey, I'll just jump in, we'll see what happens. And of course, I'm just a normal guy. I don't have connections in the industry, whatever. I'm not even in the US. And so at first I thought, I didn't ask anyone. If I had, people would have said I was insane to launch this project. And what I knew is I wanted this book to be professional, even though most of it I've done by myself. I was lucky enough at some point to have on board a good buddy of mine, Luca, who's the art director for the book. I sold him a guitar a number of years ago. We stayed in touch. And one day I said, no, I have this project with a book, and said, hey, I'll help you, whatever. So it started this thing, and he's been incredibly valuable for the experience, because there's a number of things I know how to do. I can write, I edited the book myself. Most of the photography I've done myself. It is what it is. Um, but I knew I could not art direct the book, because that's like a real profession. And I knew from the start that what I wanted is for this book to look really professional. So I also studied what other books were like. Yep, go
Sorry to
ahead.
interrupt you here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Look, for the ones that have the book, that I'm one of them, man, you did a fantastic job with the book, man. I own several books, and I chase fine things, man.
Mm-mm.
this, man, when I'm hearing, what you're telling us, and I went over the book. I haven't finished, of course, a big book, but I saw what you've done. I saw, the picture, the photography, some of the content. And man, you mentioned books like the Ibanez book, uh,
Mm-mm.
the the story of
There's
Ibanez, and
yeah.
certain key books. But look, you
Mm-mm.
did an amazing job, and we're gonna talk about all these details, starting,
Mm-mm.
with the cover. It's so
Mm.
classy. We'll talk about it. But I just
Yeah.
wanted to add that. And look, this book, when you said, I wasn't in the industry, I didn't know have any connections. Well, man, those times changed because now you're somebody, man. With this book, you're
Yeah.
somebody.
Which still kind of feels surreal to me. But I worked in my bubble for like 2 years, first on the writing and stuff. I did a lot of research. Part of it was I had the catalogs, as I mentioned, but also I imported literally about half a ton of vintage Japanese guitar magazines. I have like 30 years of young guitar, of Burr and stuff, because there's a lot of stuff when you know the Japanese guitar market, there's a lot of stuff that never made it to the catalogs, just because there's an entire part of the industry of like limited edition models and store models and whatever that never appeared in any catalog, but you see them in the magazines. So I spent weeks and weeks and weeks going through the magazines and going at, through the ads and stuff. And that was absolutely amazing, background information. But at some point I thought, okay, now I have to kind of start putting it into the world a little bit. And of course, I thought, there's a number of people that I need to talk to. Otherwise, the book is not, going to be very, very strong. And the first person on the list, of course, was Grover. And I thought, okay, how to get in touch with him. So I found out, his website, and there was a email address, the infamous info at that you never know where it's gonna go. And I sent an email just describing the project, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to approach it, and sent. And I thought, okay, I don't even know if I'm ever gonna get an answer, who's gonna see this. I mean, you don't know. And less than 2 hours later, Grover replied himself and said, hey, let's chat one of these days, this, that day, blah, 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 boom. Okay. And I thought, wow, that to me, that was amazing. And then when the day came, in my mind, I was like, okay, I have to convince Grover that this project is serious because again, I'm not known as an author. I'm not known in the industry. I'm some guy wherever. I could have been a clown. You never know. So I said, I really have to convince Grover to get on board with this. Otherwise, pretty much my project, is going to be meaningless. And in my mind, it was almost, I was preparing the call, and to me, it was almost like a job interview. And I thought, okay, I gotta put across to him what I'm trying to do with the project. And the day comes, I called him up. What I thought was going to be a 10-minute pitch, try and convince him, turned into a 4-hour conversation, and which only ended because his battery died. And I hung up, and I was like, I was blown away. And that was the beginning of, many conversations and an amazing exchange with Grover, really. I was a big fan of his work until then. Um, I'm a super big fan of the man today, and
No,
that's been an amazing experience.
and that's awesome. Or the way you did the breakdown. Like I'm a fan of the man,
Mm-mm,
because Grover Jackson, he's a creator. He created this amazing brand, which is Jackson Guitars, and there's this this the story coming from Charvel, and we're gonna
mm-mm,
talk about it a little bit about that, but talking about Grover is that like he created a unique instrument that it's gonna be timeless. That instrument is there, and
mm-mm,
that's why this book is so important because I always say this, um, like we see what's done,
Yeah.
but we don't know how it was done, you know. And a lot of people miss that key point that not everything you see, it's like it was an easy ride, you know. There was a lot of things, and putting this book together, the way you're describing it, the end result, man, it's
Mhm.
amazing. But it's the same things that happened with Jackson, with any guitars, you know. And when you said you had a 4 hour conversation with Robert Jackson, I think you guys align. You know, like he saw the vision, your
Yeah.
vision, and
Yeah.
probably he was waiting for someone to come out with that.
Yeah. Well, I think probably more than anything, trying to analyze that, you know, time after, because that was the first of many conversations. And then I got to actually, visit him and spend time with him. Um, but I think he probably detected the passion and sincerity in my project. Because again, I've talked to other people at the time and afterwards who were, some of the OGs with Jackson Charvel. And let's just say that there's been a number of people over the years who have popped up to potentially do or say or whatever things uh, um, about that history that never either never materialized or kind of went different ways or whatnot. So at the same time, from these guys, there's a certain caution maybe when just another guy comes up and says, "Oh, I'm going to do this and that and the other," which I understand absolutely. But I think the key to that is that Grover probably sensed my passion and my sincerity, and my approach to the book in the way that I wanted to tell the story as well. Um, and I guess, when I studied, because I went to college in New York, I studied liberal arts, film, television, and whatnot, and I also did a minor in journalism. I've always had a taste for writing, and my approach to this book, in terms of tone, I guess you could say, was to be very journalistic about it, as in, I was not interested in putting out a piece of work that would be partisan in any way, or say this guy's good, this guy's
Right.
bad. I I don't like drama, and that was not, I think this book deserved something else than just another piece of drama. So I've approached this again from a journalistic point of view, which is telling the story as thoroughly and detailed as possible and as objectively as humanly possible. Nobody's ever 100% objective, but trying to tell the story in a way that makes sense and is documented. The second thing is I wanted to make sure that every single thing that was in this book was documented, triple checked, and absolutely true, especially because, again, um, I did feel that it was important if I was going to put that book out to make sure that everything in there was actually correct and fact checked and stuff. And that's where the amazing part is, of course, talking to Grover, talking to Gary Kaler, talking to Tim Wilson, to Paul Gagan. I mean, Paul Gagan has given 2 interviews in the last 30 years, you know, and Scott Zimmerman in Japan. At some point, I didn't know about Scott, and it was Tim who said, "Well, we had a guy in Japan who engineered and managed all of that, and he still lives in Japan, and that's the guy." And I was like, "Okay," So it was like really talking to the source on every single aspect of everything. And even after 40 years a fan of the brand, I've learned stuff that just blew my mind because I never even suspected that was, the case. So that allowed me to dispel a number of myths, the internet myths about this and that and the other, whatever. It just killed them. And also bring information to the table that I'm pretty sure nobody has ever, heard about before. But every time, with the the source and the material and the documents to say, okay, it's not just another opinion. It's not, oh, this may have happened. No, this is documented. And I thought that was like really important to approach the book like that, just because of the credibility, I guess.
And I'm glad you mentioned this storytelling, telling the story, that this
Mhm,
wasn't about like skills or qualities or this and that. Like you mentioned, different luthiers, different ways of doing things, but that this
mhm,
was more about telling the story, like documenting the story. And
mhm,
because yeah, it's like there's different type of, I would say, on the guitar collector, guitar culture, aficionados, we chase different things. And
mhm.
I chase the stories. I do real estate for a living, and I don't explain things. I tell the story why
Mhm.
you're doing
Yeah.
this.
Mhm.
And I remember on my early days, I remember this loan officer was telling me, "Hey Alex, you talk too much. You explain too much."
Yeah,
And and
I
and
get that as well.
and it's like, it's not that I'm explaining, or I'm saying it, I'm
Mhm.
making them understand why this needs to be done. And I
Yeah,
put the scenarios that I've experienced before, and this is why we're going to do it this way. So when doing this breakdown, what was your goal? What was your approach with the book?
mhm.
I think, like I said, you fill out a gap that was missing, like a piece of history and understanding. Because I don't know if you saw the documental with Charvel,
Mm,
the
yeah,
gang that put there's a lot. I watch it, and to me, it's like, I'm not an expert, but there's a lot of missing parts on that thing that I saw it. And that's
there's
my
a whole there's
personal
yeah,
opinion.
there's a whole story behind the documentary.
Yeah,
That's
I can imagine, because there's a lot of things, like it's like, I'm a fan, but the thing is like has a lot of gaps.
yeah.
But anyway, going back to your book,
Mm-mm,
it took you 5 years, if I'm not mistaken.
mm.
Was there any moment? Well, the fact that you were able to talk to Robert Jackson, you get the response from him, 2 hours, you had the conversation, and then you had the meeting with him. How was to meet Robert Jackson? What was the experience meeting him?
Well, it happened relatively late in the project. We spent a lot of time on the phone, and I talked to the other guys. And you know, for me, it was a great learning experience and a great personal experience because, as I said, I do have some experience writing, but writing a book is a specific kind of monster. Writing the book is like 10% of it. There's thinking about how you're going to structure the book, what you're going to talk about, how much detail is good detail and how much is too much, the kind of tone of voice, and then things that, as you mentioned, we'll discuss later about the page layout, the artwork. There's a lot of things that actually contribute to, I guess, the personality of the book. And at some point, what I said to Grover, I said, this is far advanced. I knew I had a date because, of course, I wanted this book to be to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the foundation of Charvel Japan. And Charvel Japan was founded, in '85. So there was this kind of pressure. It's like, okay, it can't be, it can't be 2026 because then it's not the 40th anniversary anymore. So I had this date, and it was tremendous work, but very rewarding. And in the spring of '24, I said to Grover, I said, "Man, I have to come over and meet you, and we have to chat, and we have to meet in person." So we juggled the dates, and I ended up going to visit him in August 2024. And honestly, it was incredible because we had talked on the phone. He said, "Okay, come over," and he's been for like what 4 years now, 4 or 5 years now, back in Tennessee, which is where he's originally from. And he's in a small town about an hour, 15 minutes south of Nashville. And said, "Okay, come over." And I said, "Okay, I'll come over for a week." So I got my details, my stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I had I took a digital recorder and I had a little camera and I had this thing, packed everything, and I just went out to Pulaski, Tennessee. But I had no idea what I was going to find. I knew I was going, I knew I was going to stay for a week, but I didn't know what I was going to find. I didn't know if Grover lived in the house and worked somewhere else. I didn't know how available he would be during that week. And as it turns out, incredibly luckily for me, um, well, as some people know, he's got a right outside town. He's got like a big hangar place. Half of it is workshop, half of it is living quarters. So he lives there. Um, and the amazing thing is, he had two guys working with him, but that week they were on holiday. So he was by himself. So it was just like Grover and me, one on one, 15 hours a day for an entire week. And to me, it was just amazing because from the first second, it's like we had been buddies all of our lives. I mean, you know, at some point, very quickly, I would forget I was hanging out with Grover Jackson because he was just so nice and so welcoming and warm, and it was just incredible. And the of course, there was stuff that was around the book, but then stories about artists, about how he grew up with the guys from Lynyrd Skinner, then this and that, but and you're just sitting there, and I was soaking that in like a sponge.
Yeah.
And also, on the first day, as I said, I had my little digital recorder, my camera and stuff in my little suitcase. I showed up, we started talking, and I was like, okay, all that stuff stays in the case. I didn't record anything. Just because, again, back to what we are saying earlier about concerts and stuff,
Right.
I wanted to be there, absolutely in the moment with Grover and just
I'm glad.
absorb.
I'm glad you mentioned. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm glad you mentioned that part, being present. Because I I can imagine you being with him, talking to him, and like you said, describe like you feel like we've been friends forever, but there's this weird chemistry and energy, that you guys been talking for months, and now and it feels like you know him forever, but now it's like you said, you forget he's Robert Jackson and he's telling you the stories, and to me it's like you're talking to Yoda, so that's what came to my mind when you're telling this. And but at the same time, we were talking about the concerts, right? That you're not present and this and that. And yeah, you have to, like, you have your gadgets. You're there for a reason. You wanna capture the moment, but at some point you have to make the decision of let's just be present. Let's be you
Yeah,
and me.
yeah.
And I understand exactly what you're talking about right now, because last year on Father's Day I had this opportunity with this artist that he did this Father's Day gathering for 20 people in Puerto Rico, and I went there. My goal was to interview him and do a podcast with him, but I was like, when I was there, I realized like, no, put this stuff away, just be here, enjoy the moment, and trust me, I had the experience of my life. Like we became friends, because of that. But
Yeah.
anyway, I just want to kind of like, kind of relate your
Mhm.
experience, because when you're telling me your experience, I kind of portray and envision how the story you're telling us. Um, you went to Tennessee, no Nashville. You went to Tennessee.
Yeah.
Um, was this like at his
Well, he
workshop?
Well, he's got a property, and he's got a big warehouse.
Okay.
I if I seem to remember, he said it was a winery at some point, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. Big hangar, and as I said, half of it is his workshop, half of it is living quarters. He's got his office and whatnot. He's got a huge kitchen, and the funny thing is, that's one of those things. It's like a huge kitchen, and apparently cooking is one of his passions. Apparently, over the years, people have told him he could have been a chef, and I believe it. So he said, I've always wanted, it's one of those things. He said to me, I've always wanted like one of those big, stainless steel restaurant stoves things and blah, blah, blah. And he had the space, so he got one. And one of the days, we were thinking of having dinner. I said, let's not go to town because we're gonna go every night, whatever. Let's do something. Let's just cook here. And I said, okay. So wheels out the the big barbecue thing and the blah and the vegetables, and he starts cooking, and it's like it was amazing. And at some point, as I said, his warehouse has like three huge doors on three of the walls, and one of them is the kitchen. So you open the big door, and just hanging out there. And I was lucky with the weather, I guess, as well. End of day, there's a kind of sweetness in the air. The trees, the wildlife starts to move around. He has cats, whatever. Grover's cooking, and again, you're sitting there just enjoying the moment and mind blown. It's like, okay, I'm hanging out with Grover. He's cooking dinner for us, and it's like, I'm not the kind of person that idolizes anyone, or I'm not like the groupie mentality. But I
Right.
was just blown away because genuinely, as a fan, as the case with Grover, but again, talking to all these guys, to Tim, to Scott, to Paul, to Gary Kaler, to Mike Eldred, to me, these guys are legendary, but in a kind of good, constructive way, not because they're famous, but they're just the adventure was amazing. And one thing that surprised me when I was working on the book is, as I said in the beginning, I had no idea if any of the guys, first of all, if I could get through to any of those guys, and if they would be interested or not. Everybody was absolutely wonderful. I mean, absolutely wonderful and kind and, willing to spend time and share stories and stuff. And that just, to me, that's really one sign of the greats. You know, they're great. They don't need to remind you every 5 seconds. They're just, cool people to hang out with. And what surprised me is that not only were they very happy to share their, adventures and stories from back in the 80s, but I realized that all of them had a real emotional kind of tie to those times. All of them were like really kind of moved by those years. They did all those things and worked together and stuff. And that, when you see people of that stature and that age kind of frame who are like really emotional about these things, it's wow, it hits hard. It's like, it's amazing. And after the book was done, they were like, I myself, again, from a fan perspective, was so happy that they thought my work, was worthy, that and to be acknowledged by these guys to me is like huge. And and also, a number of them expressed gratitude and said, "Man, it's so good that you did that." And that to me is almost surreal. Again, because I'm still from the perspective of, a fan of the brand. I'm just one guy, somewhere. And to all of a sudden be kind of having this interaction with these guys is just still amazing.
No,
And you said, earlier very kindly that now, by putting this book out, I've kind of put myself on the map.
exactly.
With, you know, it's still me in my living room, so that's surreal. And I know it's true intellectually, but it kind of blows my mind. And Grover said to me, he said, in 40 years, nobody has knocked on the door to, get interested and write the story, which, good for me. But, and Paul said a lot of the same things that, we're talking about the electronics, about the Jackson amps. There's a lot of dumb stories out there. And he said, for years I've been reading on forums and on Facebook and stuff, oh, about the amps, this guy did that. And he says, I'm reading that and it's like, I'm the one who did that. All this stuff never existed. And he said, nobody ever came to me to get the real story. So that turned out, to where these guys are actually kind of thankful that they were able to tell the
That
story
that
directly.
there is some, and you know what I like about this book and about you, that besides you did this amazing job, but also you're a fan. Also
Mhm,
you're someone that when we started earlier, talking about your first guitar, which was your Charvel M6. It comes from someone that kind of comes from the same kind of like times, with the instrument, with the music,
mhm.
with everything that was happening in the 80s. So to me, it is important because right now there's all these guitar channels, YouTubers, TikTokers, you name it. But some
Mhm,
of them that they don't even have a Charbel, with them,
mhm.
and it is not a requirement to talk about Charbel, owning a Charbel, but it makes a difference because it makes a difference. It makes, things a little more
Mhm.
genuine. And
Yeah.
another thing that you mentioned is that at some point you realize that all these creators that are part of the book, part of the history, they're normal people like yourself, like myself,
Mhm.
but they were innovators. They created
Yeah.
things that made a difference. But at the end of the day,
Mhm.
also, it's like you did your job as someone that was documenting and talking to them and putting these, like you said, the fun thing, that idolizing, that you lose perspective sometimes, just the fact that you have this person in front of you. I think
Mhm.
they like your authenticity of your approach.
Well, I think that's where certainly I think the sincerity and the passion come in versus kind of kissing butt.
Right,
It's just it's genuine respect
right.
and admiration. It's not, kind of again groupie mentality kind of thing. Um, and it's it's been an amazing human experience, on top of everything. And I think also, the Japanese Charvel adventure is a very meaningful episode in the history of the guitar industry. So that to me makes it also a very interesting and central topic. A lot of things that that I explain in the book about the way the Japanese market functioned and the factories and stuff is also background information that applies to all the other brands. It's just also a look into the Japanese industry of the 80s. So there's that aspect, and Grover asked me when I went there. He said, "Why Charvel Japan?"
That
And
was
I
my
said,
next
"Well,
question.
yeah, well,
But I kind of
and
know the answer because well, you share earlier, but I'll let you
yeah,
tell
and
us
I said,
what you
well,
told me.
I became aware of like the Charvel legendary kind of thing again with the bands from the 80s and stuff. I could have never dreamed to have one of those guitars. So to me, Charvel Japan was a way to have access to the legend. And one thing that has really moved me is first of all, the book has sold throughout the entire world, which I never expected. Some territories, obviously, the US, some countries in Europe, and so I expected, but I've sold, all over North America, South America. The book started getting traction in Japan. It's got quite a following in Australia. It's sold in Singapore, Malaysia, all the Nordics, everywhere, like literally, everywhere in the world, which was I never expected. And I've been receiving a lot of feedback from people. And what I realize is this book to me is really a sort of love letter at the same time to the 80s, to those guitars, to my younger years, to a lot of things. And I've really put a lot of love into the book besides the information. And what really moved me is that has translated everywhere. I've received messages again from the Americas, from the Nordics, from Japanese fans, And everybody has that same thing of like, man, my first guitar was a, Charvel model, whatever, whatever in those years. And I realized that throughout the world, there are so many people who have this emotional attachment for whatever reason to those guitars from the 80s, that first model series from Charvel and stuff. And it's still very much alive all these years later. And I think that has to mean something, you know, that those guitars are still so much loved, all this time later.
Look, I like the way you put it. Love letter, love letter to to the
Mhm.
brand, to the history, and I think you accomplished it. I think you did,
Mhm.
and that's why um, you said the first release was 300 books, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You're doing the second one on this April, right?
yeah, yeah. And
Is it the same 300 units?
it's going to be more. I mean, the story behind the 300 units, as I said, this project is entirely self-produced, self-financed, self-everything. And before I put the book out in the world, I had no idea if I would sell 10 of them. And I think one of the things also that allowed me to be completely free is from the beginning, when I made the decisions to think, okay, do I look for a publisher? Do I do this? There's a lot of things around the making of the book that you have to think about. And I thought, I'm going to do it on my own. If it's successful, it's going to be mine 100%. If it fails, it's going to be mine 100%. And also, I wanted to keep complete creative editorial control on what the book was going to be, how big, how fat, so that was very freeing. And also the fact that in my mind from day one, I thought, okay, if I sell 10 of them, I will still be happy and proud to have done it. So I didn't have that pressure to say, oh, it has to work. But I thought, okay, how many do I put out? A book like that, as you may imagine, is not cheap to produce.
Right.
So I said, okay, let's make it, an edition of 300, see what happens. And it turns out the first edition was sold out in 5 weeks.
And look,
So
um, the word, it's spreading out. Like people are talking about the book. People are like missed out. I was one of them. I missed out. Luckily, I'm always seeing things, and I saw,
yeah.
Pat posted it. I was like,
Mhm.
I missed it. But anyway, now we're talking. So, but the thing is that I think it's a different book, and the more people get to know like what's in the book, because
Mhm.
there is other great books out there, but I don't think there's one like this one.
Mhm.
I think you broke a pattern of you know not only storytelling but also kind of like being a little more thrilled about
Mhm.
the what you documented on the book.
Mhm.
Now, let's talk about the legality of it. Like when you said, should I contact the publisher? Should I,
Mhm.
basically you are the investor in this. You put the money. You did the work. You are your own risk. I sell 10. I sell 300. Great, but now
Mhm.
what's the legality when you put in a project like this? When you're going to talk about Charbel Jackson, that Japan, as we know now, Charbel and Jackson are owned by Fender. Um, did you have to go through something like getting their okay to do this, or you don't need an okay to publish a book about
Well,
something?
there's a number of basic legal things that apply in whatever industry, whether it's film or television or book, is you're obviously not allowed to use trademark stuff. So, in the book, I don't use any logo by itself. I don't use any trademark material. That's also why most of the photography is mine, because obviously, I could not hire a photographer and pay buyouts for the photography and stuff. So it had to be mine. All the photography in the book that is not mine, has been shared with me with permission to use it, and that was very clear from the beginning. So I was very, I wanted to make sure that everything was um, not only legally but morally okay, I would say, which I think is part of what you need again if you want to establish credibility. And we talked about the artwork, and I have to give another shout out to my buddy Luca here, because again, there's a number of things that I could do myself, and then if the book looks like it looks now, it's thanks to him. But the great thing is, we really connected, as in he's also an 80s nerd. He's also a Pat Nagel fan. He loves that whole universe. So there's a lot of things that he did not have to explain. You can work with a professional art director, but if that person doesn't know guitars or doesn't know, it's difficult to kind of
More
connect.
difficult. Yeah.
With Luca, it was like, okay, I had in my mind a clear vision for the typography, for the artwork, the chapter headers and stuff. It had to be 80s, so obviously there's some general universe there that will be familiar to people. But again, to your point of legality, we're not using actual Nagel artwork, in the book. But there's a 80s kind of style to it. I also knew that I wanted to incorporate some Japanese element, because of course it's not only 80s, but it had to be that Japanese element, hence the little things that we've added in chapter headers. And I would say to Luca, hey, I see it like this, guitar on the left, boom, 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 things, blah, and your streamers, and this and that. And and he he would say, okay, let me try out a few things and test a few things and whatnot. And come back 2 days later. So I've tried this. What do you think? And I was like, okay. Everything I saw in my mind, he just brilliantly, put onto a page. So that was amazing. Um, and yeah, I think the hardest, believe it or not, the hardest part of the whole project was the cover.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah. Look,
that's what we did last.
it's super classy, I like very classy cover, very
Yeah,
catchy also, it's
yeah,
they say less is more, but you
yeah.
guys
But you're gonna love the story because, as I said, through the book was a lot of work, but we just went through, and it was funny because, I would say at some point, I would say to Luca, okay, I still want to talk about this and show a few pictures of this, that, the other, and he would say to me, yeah, but we're gonna have to add like 4 or 6 pages, kind of thing. And I said to him, it's not a school paper, so I don't need filler pages, but I'm going to put in the book everything that I think needs to be in the book. So at some point, we're at like 350 pages. Oh, I talk about this, the pictures. And he would say, oh, we're at 375. Oh, we're at 420. Oh, and we landed at, for first edition, at 720. But everything I wanted is in the book. And I don't think there's any filler at all. But I think, again, a book like this, you figure you don't want to think about, oh, I should have done this or should have put. So that was that. So it all went smoothly, a lot of work, but smoothly. And then um, what do we do for the cover? And of course, the brief was the cover needs to have a coherence with the inside artwork for the chapter headers. So we knew we would have streamers. We knew we needed some sort of design. We knew we needed the Japanese element. Fortunately, the typography that we have, for the titles, I think is very strong and very nice. And I thought, okay, but we can't put guitars on the cover. And I thought, again, you can't put a headstock or logo or whatever, because as you mentioned, for legalities, it's trademark stuff. You can't use it. So I said, okay, how do we do that? And we, for 3 weeks, we did mock-ups, we checked things and blah, and it just was no good at all. And one night, and I guess you'll enjoy that part of the story. One night, middle of the night, I wake up and I'm like, Black Album. And I fall back asleep. And then, and then in the morning, you know how it is. Sometimes you have a brilliant idea in the middle of the night. You wake up in the morning, you think about it, and you go, what? But I thought, yeah, that's maybe that's not a bad idea, again, because it's striking. Then I remembered, I think it was the bass player for Loudness, who had a bass that had the rising sun, but like gray over black. And I thought that would looked really classy. So I thought, okay, let's try that. And we have the Japanese element with the shark skin and whatnot. And then, of course, dealing with the printer, I said, okay, the cover is so kind of plain, which is good, but can we add a few details? So do you have like maybe foil or something for the title, or
I love
something
the
just.
foil. The foil, it's
And
foil
he
is
said, well, we have holographic foils and stuff, and we already had the idea of the shark fin on the spine of the book, which is almost like the same exact width as a guitar neck. So I thought, okay, black cover with a shark fin on the spine, no matter where it is on the bookshelf, you're gonna find it. Um, and they showed me like a selection of like 25 different holographic foils, and one of them is called abalone. And I looked at it and said, "That's the one," And I think that's also like one of those little touches with the black cover and having the title and stuff in kind of mother of pearl kind of finish.
oh yeah. Oh yeah,
It just
it is
it
like
just looks great,
hmm
you know.
now,
So that's how it came about.
sorry, okay, so now where the book was published, like the printing, where it was done?
So same thing as far as printers, I had to try and figure out where to get it printed. A lot, if not most, professional printers these days print in China. Um, I had a couple of providers in China that looked promising. Um, I didn't think it would work for me just because the printing itself would be probably financially interesting, but then there's the shipping coming into Europe, there's the customs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought the financial aspect is probably going to be, obliterated. Plus, it's the first time I was working on a book and working with Luca. We thought, okay, maybe we need something that's closer to home so we can keep a better check on technical stuff. Just because, again, there's a lot of stuff I just didn't know. Um, so I thought, okay, I'm going to get it printed in Europe. So I looked at a whole bunch of different countries in Eastern Europe, and I ended up picking this company in Latvia, which is like one of the biggest printers in Europe. Um, and they just produce amazing things, and I got in touch with them. So that the book was ultimately, and the second edition as well, printed by the same people in Latvia. But again, it was like a learning process of I love books, but I've never thought what goes into producing a physical book. You have to choose, the thickness, the weight of the paper, the type of paper, coated, not coated, what type of color thing, and this and that and the other, and so there's a lot of things to think about that I did not suspect, but I learned a lot doing all of that. And I think they've done a fantastic job. I mean, everybody pretty much, the feedback is the quality is impressive. And
Hmm.
again, I had to look at, finance, but I knew a book like this, what I did not want is to look at a page and see through it, the
Right.
picture from
Okay.
the other side. It's
Right.
like,
Okay.
so
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned we're talking about the quality of the book, that more than the content. And you're right. Look, it's kind of like you did everything the way it was supposed to be done, because there are some great books that are not that great quality.
mm,
Like the cover is not great. I like hardcover books. I don't like
mm,
the paperback, I think it's called.
yeah,
And like you said, yeah, the quality of the paper makes a difference. But I think the whole thing was done like check, check, check. My
yeah.
next question was about, since you are the one that handled the whole thing, How did you manage this? Am I doing it right? Like this, when you have the editor, that you send the book to someone, to the editor, and the editor says, change this, and that. On this case, how that part was handled?
Well, there's a number of things that I knew, and I guess that my day job probably helped me with a certain sense of what I wanted things to look like. I thought, for example, a lot about the layout of the book because I think we probably all have the same classic guitar books from the 90s and 2000 and stuff. And one thing that I just don't like at all is when you open a book and like it's just filled from edge to edge stuff. You look at it and it just doesn't feel like you want to get into it. So I knew obviously that people would love to see the photos, but in all modesty, I thought the text was also worth reading. So I thought, okay, how do we work the layout so there's space, right? And in the book, I mean, of course, every spread is slightly different, but there's a lot of places in the book where you have space in the page. And I think that visually is important because, it just makes things a bit sexier. So there's space in the book. Then whenever there's text, there's usually not like an entire page of text, except, at the end with the interviews and whatnot. But, it's kind of little bits of text in a way that I think it's a really easy read. And when you have like a couple of paragraphs, you look at the photos and it makes you probably, hopefully, want to read the text as well, because you're not going to spend, you know, too much time trying to figure out, all the details and whatnot. So that those subtle things were trying to make the book visually as, appealing as possible, I guess. Because I guess, again, there's a lot of things that are interesting in the story. There's a lot of press articles and stuff in there that you might want to read later, at a later date and come back to. But I was trying to make it easily accessible, in the reading format. And then as far as the text, the last chapter of the book originally was not intended. I mean, all the conversations I've had with Tim and Paul and Scott and Chris Holmes were like conversations for me to kind of gather the information for the book. And then at some point, I started doing the transcription of all those discussions, um, cleaning them up and stuff. And I realized that was actual kind of historical gold, just because, it's those guys telling the stories in their own words and stuff. And I thought that was like really valuable to share. So that's why that was halfway through the project. I thought, okay, I'm going to create a new chapter at the end of the book. And I'm going to put, those discussions with all those guys because, it's, it feels more lively. And I guess to your point earlier, what I wanted with this book was not just give dates and facts and stuff and, hard facts. It was more, again, you know, um, trying to put some places and faces and people behind all the events of history. I'm a big history fan, and I always think that you get a really good look at big historical events when you look through the lens of like the normal people of, their lives and what they experienced. Um, and this I was fortunate that Grover and Paul shared all those historical photos because those are actual printed printed photos in their albums, the photos from the factory in Japan and stuff. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, I have a model, whatever, it was built in whatever year and blah 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 in such and such place. Okay, but if you see the factory, if you see the guys making the guitars, if you see, the environment outside the factory, all of a sudden, you're more invested in it because it's not just facts. It's giving you a perspective of the people who actually built, those guitars.
Um, I'm thinking everything you're telling me, I try to kind of like a projector on the movie theater, kind of imagine, everything you're telling me. And you just mentioned Chris Holmes. I don't
Yeah.
know if you saw that documentary that was about Chris Holmes.
Mm.
I'm not sorry or not, but he has this Jackson guitar there,
Yeah.
and I find it super cool when he is like, I don't know how long he owns that guitar, but I can
Mm-mm.
tell, it's been with him forever.
Yeah.
Um, for the ones that don't have the book, if you have to describe like Chris Holmes, how would you describe him? Like,
Okay. There's a reason why he's in the book. One of the things is I did not want the book to be um, about artist celebrities. That to me would have been nice, but an entirely different book. Now, um, the reason I've put Chris in there is um, on the one hand, I have a feeling a little bit like Grover. I mean, a lot of people in the know in the industry, um, give Grover for what he did and Chris for what he did credit, but I've always felt neither of them get the credit they deserved. And when you think about it, Chris is like one of the original OGs of Jackson Charvel back in the day. And not only is he still, but he's still playing those guitars from back in the day. So that was one of the things. Then, as a personal experience, it turns out that I met Chris in 1986 in Switzerland, my second Iron Maiden concert, which was the Somewhere in Time tour. And Wasp was opening for them. I don't know everywhere, but at least in Switzerland. And, being a kid at the time, speaking English, I would always talk to the merch guys and whatnot. And sometimes I get a pick, a little patch, a little thing, but, a souvenir from the concert. And at that show, I didn't get anything. But when everything was done, everybody left, show was over. I stayed in the hall just because just again for the atmosphere, and I kind of just wind down a little bit and stuff. And Chris comes on the stage looking for gear or something, whatever. And I was like, "Hey, Chris, what? Do you have a pick or something?" And he's like, "No, man, I just chucked them all of them in the crowd. I don't have any picks and stuff, but maybe there's something that fell on stage somewhere. Come up here, we'll look." So I get on the stage. I get on the stage and both of us are like on our fours, just like crawling around the stage looking for a potential lost pick somewhere on stage. We never found one, but that was not the point. I was thinking, man, if somebody walks in and sees the both of us
right,
just like walking on our fours on the stage, like what's wrong with those guys? But it stayed with me because he was so absolutely nice.
right.
And I mean, you have Wasp, the stage image, um, whatever public image may have been portrayed of him, and we'll leave it at that. Um, the guy is so absolutely wonderful man.
What?
And I thought, and I thought now he lives in France. And I thought, it would be nice to give him a little bit of spotlight. And when I went to visit Grover, I told him this story. Because Grover shared stories about all the artists he's worked with, and there's people he likes less, um, whatever. And I told him the story about Chris Holmes, and I put a big smile on his face, and he said, "That's my Chris." And that's when I found out that Chris is like one of the guys from back in the day that he really loves. Again, I think probably because um, neither of them are easy people,
Mm-hmm.
but I think they're very genuine from a human point of view. And, I think Grover appreciates that in people. And I think Chris is just, and so I connected with him and I said, "Hey, I'm doing this book. Would you like to talk?" And said, "Yeah, sure." So we talked about it and the history of the guitars. That's the interview. Well, it's a chat. It's not really an interview that's in the book about the story of his, you know, uh, Terminator guitar, the yellow star, that was Charvel Jackson, different necks and destroyed and rebuilt and whatnot. And we spent an hour chatting. It was just before Christmas in 2024. And it was great. And it was just so nice, almost 40 years later, to just talk to the guy again. And, ever since 86, I never missed an opportunity when the conversation came up, about the band, whatever, for me to say just how nice he is. And that is one of his trademarks. I think everybody who knows him up close, thinks he's a really, really sweet guy.
What a great story about it, and it's the gesture, the person that taking the time, to look
Yeah.
for a pic for you, and tells a lot about him, especially those days that Wasp, like,
Yeah.
they were on these, you know, uh, the times were different, and I did. I'm not sure you watched the documentary about him or not. It was good. I wasn't really a big fan of Wasp, but when I started, the first time I heard about Wasp was when I was 11, and I was very, like the look and the whole thing, and but when I saw the Chris Holmes documentary and the whole thing, yeah, it gives you a different perspective, like
Yeah.
of the man. And now you're telling me this is a story, kind of like it goes back to what we discuss. They're normal people, like and like you. I want to start using the line Grover told you or you said. They really like him, or they like him less, like liking less people, like because
Well,
there are some artists like going back to the Charbel documentary that I watched, um, that I saw. Why this guy is not here? Why this other guy is not here? And I kind of try to do some research, and there's stories why those people basically like why these people are not on the documentary.
mm-mm.
And that's kind of like when people ask me about the Charbel documentary, I was like, I watch it, but there's a bunch of things that missing there. So it's kind of like cool and not cool because it's like your book, like you call it the break because there's a lot of things here. There's no way you can tell the story in an 100 or 200 page book because
Yeah.
you're not gonna cover the whole thing. So I think this is what people's gonna get from your book, like really, really more details, attention to detail of the story.
Mm-mm.
Uh, I think I interrupted you. You want to say something?
No, I was just saying, just to finish on Chris. I think he, we had this chat. I think one of the things, and to me, that's a real compliment. When I think of him, to me, he's like a little bit like, the simple man from Lynyrd Skynyrd.
Oh,
He's
okay.
absolutely, he's genuine. And what he does, he said to me, he said, I'm lucky that I can still do what I do. I get on stage, I play music. That's what I love to do. And he says, I'm just happy when I see people, my music makes people happy. And it's the kind of guy I also kind of, became acquainted with the guy here in France who's like his official photographer now. So he's told me stories as well of hanging out with Chris and whatnot. I just think it's cool, and I'm glad it just came together that way, and that's the reason for him being in the book, really. Um,
Now, talking about artists, you said there's specific reasons why, I wanted certain artists to be here. I didn't really want to go with the main, like famous or have
yeah.
more recognition in the industry now. But if I have to, let's see, if I have to ask you an artist that you will kind of will wanted to have it in the book, which one will be the artist?
Um, there's a lot of them. I mean,
Which one?
I pick one, to me, strictly as in, in the Jackson Charvel family, I would say definitely, Warren DeMartini, Jakey Lee,
Oh, okay.
you know, to me, these are some of my favorite guitarists. Um, one of my most, loved guitarist would be George Lynch, and at some point he did play Charvels and whatnot, but he's not Charvel artist anymore. But yeah, I mean those and same thing. I think I don't know them personally. I don't know much about them. I talked with Dave Friedman a little bit about Jake Lee, um, but I think both of them are probably super cool guys as well. So I think it's part of it. I think Warren always seems to be quite a down to earth guy. Jake as well. They're kind of guys that it's not just okay. They're legendary guitar players, this and that and the other. They also appear again from the outside. I don't know them, but they appear like really nice people as well. So that's I would say those two guys are certainly up there.
Okay. Now let's talk about. Have you been in Japan or not yet?
Um, that is a funny story because I've been to Japan once.
Okay.
Uh, that in itself is for work actually. I was um, I was just that was in 1991. I was a production assistant in Paris, struggling. And I just come back from New York, and I started working in Paris with a production company that did production for Japanese clients who came to Paris to shoot films and shoot photography and whatnot. So they were Japanese in Paris. So I did a first job with them, and on the second on the second day of the job, I'm told, well, the producer wants to talk to you. And you're a freelancer, you start out, the producer wants to talk to you. It's like,
So you're
okay,
getting fired.
I'm fired. What have I done? It's only my second day. But anyway, and the producer says to me, you lived in New York just before here. I said, yeah. Said, you have contacts in New York. I said, yeah. I didn't, but as some people say, first say yes and then figure it out.
My neighbors.
He said, yeah, and he said, well, we have a client who needs to shoot, a campaign, and we need, to do castings with supermodels. It was, if I remember correctly, it was around September, and at that time of the year, most of the models were in New York. So he said, you need to organize a casting in New York, and pictures and blah and blah and blah and fine. So that was on a Tuesday. I said, okay, I can do that. When do we need to do this? I said, next Monday. I was like, holy shit. You know? So that week, I was working during the day on my first job and working at night with New York, trying to figure it out. In some way or another, I managed to find a studio, a photographer, and this and that and the other. And I flew out to New York. Okay. And I spent 2 days, doing the casting in on the east side and some sort of penthouse that was just amazing. I mean, anyway, and those were the days where, again, no internet, no whatever, whatever. And the Japanese were really thorough. They wanted a complete file on the girl, what she'd done, who she worked with, this and that, Polaroids and this and the different formats of film, And I get a call again from the office, and they say, well, there's been a problem because the client needs these by whatever time tomorrow, and there was physically no time left to send them by courier. So they said, can you jump on a plane and take the job to our client in Japan? And I was like, well, let me consult my agenda. Yes, So before I knew it, I was in the plane, all Nippon Airlines, going to Tokyo and whatever, and it was a big adventure. And of course, I went to the music stores, and I had zero money. I would, but I went to all the stores, and they had that's when they had all the I went to a store, I forget which one it is, with just a super store with like 5 stories or 6 stories, and each one with an instrument. And on the guitar floor, they had like an entire wall of those Charvel from 1989, the blue crackles and the yellow crackles and stuff,
Mm.
an entire wall. And it was like every brand, they had like 50 guitars. I'd never seen a music store like that. And I was like, you know, all I could afford was a couple of picks. So I purchased a couple of picks as souvenirs, and that was it. And, just to think so many years later, writing the story about those guitars. I mean, there's something there that kind
Yeah.
of, you
You know
know,
what? I'm glad I asked you that question, and thank you for sharing that great story. How old were you when this happened and you went to Japan?
that was 91, so I must have been what, 20, 24?
And you were young, but awesome story. Like
Yeah.
you want to fly to Japan. Let me check my agenda. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day, a flight to Japan was like a huge heap of money. So it was like, and the funny thing is, I got there, I had, 3.5 words of Japanese. I was greeted at the airport by a guy in a suit and tie who
Right.
had 3 words of English.
Mhm.
So we smiled a lot, on the train and they put me up in a palace hotel, and I'd just come from New York. I had my ripped 501s, my hat, and my whatever.
Right.
And we get to this palace, and I don't know what I'm doing there, how long I'm gonna, I stay, whatever. And so I get there, and it's the kind of thing where, every time you do something, some guy comes in with white gloves and does it for you. You step into the elevator, a guy comes in, pushes the button. The guy steps inside the elevator, pushes your floor, steps out, so you don't touch anything anymore, And anyway, I get the call from the producer and said, well, um, the job is delivered. I'm like, just wait at the hotel. I'm like, I'm there. I don't know what I'm waiting for. And I'm thinking, I'm in Japan. I don't know if I'll ever come back here again.
Right. I need
And
to go out. I need to
I need to see things,
go
but I don't know
explore.
if I'm supposed to leave in 2 hours or whatnot. And I said, maybe I can stay. Maybe I can stay. I'm in a palace hotel. I mean, I
Right.
couldn't even afford, the wallpaper. So, and the producer calls me up like an hour later, says, the client is ecstatic with the job you've done. You can stay for 3 days in Tokyo, all expenses paid. What?
That's awesome.
And, that was my time in Japan,
That's
and it
awesome.
was,
Great story, man. So probably you were good at what you were doing at the time. I mean, it seems like it. You earned the 3 days spent, all expenses paid. Now,
I have to say, working as a freelancer in production, um, the only people I can genuinely say who have been consistently not only honest every time, but grateful and absolutely, dependable were the Japanese clients. Sometimes it gets hard because they can get really, demanding on the quality and stuff. Sometimes, depending what generation you work with, it can be a bit stressful, but they're super correct. Whatever the deal was, the deal is respected. You get paid on time. If they're happy with your work, they usually give you a little gift and they take you out to dinner. And man, you never
yeah,
forget that experience.
they have manners, they have class, they
Yeah,
have
yeah.
worth. I went to Japan last year,
Mhm.
a year ago. I went to my birthday is on the April 23rd, so I went to Japan to celebrate my 47
Yeah.
day. And look, yeah, it was a great experience. Like just being there, thinking like I'm in Japan. I'm here, and I did go to the guitar district. I went to the ESP stores. I mean, the store and the museum. And I have this guitar collector friend of mine that he has like this amazing collection of guitars. So, but going back to the culture itself, like I remember in the morning, like 7 a.m. in the morning, it felt like when the pandemic was happening here in the
Mhm.
US, all quiet,
Mhm.
nothing is moving, and it's just people were not honking, people no, were not just like they're just quiet,
Impatient.
like, and I really like you said, there are, you went in the 80s, right? 80s, 90s.
Yeah, 91. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure more challenging as far as the language, because when I went, I was like, I don't speak Japanese, but
Mhm.
majority of people they speak English there, and I apologize to them, like, I'm sorry, I don't speak Japanese, I don't
Yeah.
speak English. No, no worries, I can practice and this and that. But they are more proper, they're
Yeah.
like, most of the time, out of my experience, 1 to 10 was 9.9. Just
Yeah.
one taxi driver got a little crazy, but other than that, all great. Now,
Another funny story, quick story about the Japanese aspect. As I said, I wanted to introduce in a kind of elegant and subtle way, the Japanese graphic element in the book. But also at some point I thought, okay, it would be cool visually to have, all the chapter titles and the title of the book translated to Japanese.
right.
And at that point, I would have never dreamed that my book would reach Japan, okay? But me being me, um,
Just in case.
much, much, I guess, focused on detail, pain in the ass, some others would say. I thought, okay, I don't want to be like, those guys who get like a kanji tattoo on their neck that's supposed to be like soul warrior kind of thing, but in fact it says chicken soup or dickweed kind of thing. So I said, I want to make sure it's proper. And fortunately, talking to Scott in Japan, his wife, um, not only obviously speaks English and Japanese, she lived in the States for a while, um, but professionally, she also adapts dialogues for documentaries and film and TV and stuff. So it's her job, again, not to translate, but adapt. And what I wanted is, of course, them knowing what I was trying to tell in the chapter and the meaning of the title, and, to have titles that would make sense to a native Japanese speaker. But at that time, I never thought any Japanese would see the book. So when I finally got the word and books started getting popular in Japan, I was like, man, you
Hey,
know. But that's and I've received very moving messages from people in Japan because not only, I mean, are they passionate about the brand and the guitars and the story and whatever else, I think they were very um, moved by the portrayal of Japan that kind of interweaves in the book and the kind of respectful way that the culture is presented and the artwork and all of that. And I know they've been really, sensitive to that.
you know what? I'm glad you mentioned this part because consciously or subconsciously, one of the reasons this book triggered me, I need to have it, was the Japan thing. Like it wasn't Charvel Jackson, US, or it was the Japan thing. Like I know it was different because we all know, the Japanese industry in guitars. I mentioned ESP, Ibanez. We will talk about Aria and all these brands. That back in the 80s, there was these companies that were making replicas, very good replicas of what was on the market at the time. My very first guitar, actually, my brother, because he was on our first band. I was 13, he was 15. Our very first guitar was a guitar that looked like a Jackson guitar, like a
Mhm.
dinky, but it was the brand was Session, Pro Session, and it
Mhm.
was like a replica of a Jackson, and they were like the quality of the instruments, the quality, the very nice guitars. And last year that I went, I can see like the industry still has that 80s 90s vibe that
Mhm.
you experience it on the 48th Street. you can
Yeah.
you can feel it because the stores are exactly the same.
Mhm. Well, I think the thing, in regards to all that kind of replica culture in Japan, I mean, there's reasons why that happened the way it did, but I think it's again a very cultural thing where, they have such a culture of excellence and detail and doing something exactly how it should be, and that's why at some point, Japanese copies, some of them started becoming equally as good or even better than their original US counterparts. And I'm not talking about Jackson Charvel, but other brands
Right.
that we know and love just because, things happened. I think that moment was also very interesting in the 80s because at some point there was a rise and fall of the Japanese guitar industry because of commerce, because of exchange rates, because of the rise of, Korea, Indonesia,
Right.
China, India. So I think it was a crucial episode really of that
Yeah,
for that industry.
that's a different book that might be a great project to have in the future for you, putting that the story of the Japanese industry, the guitar industry. What are your thoughts of these the caparison guitars that were founded by the Charvel Jackson Japan back in the day, of that brand. That this, there's a lot of brands, new brands that were employees
Yeah.
from what
Well, what happened with that essentially is um, in Charvel, Japan, the main factory, there were episodes in '88 that I think will surprise a lot of people. But let's just, for sake of simplicity, the main factory was Shushingaki. That was a factory, and then the distributor for Japan was Kyowa Shokai. And what happened is the contract that Kyowa Shokai had for distribution with Charvel Jackson ended in '94. They did not renew it for a number of reasons. I talk about it a little bit in the book. Um, and Shushin kind of decided, well, we know how to make these guitars. We're going to keep making these guitars and distributing those guitars, in Japan and whatnot. And at that point in the early '90s, one of the master luthiers at Jackson Charvel was Itaru Kano. And he designed a number of iconic models like the Jackson Falcon, which was originally a signature model for a famous Japanese guitar player, which was an offset guitar with 27 frets. Keep that thought in mind. He designed the Doug Aldrich signature models and a number of models that I think are absolutely amazing, early '90s Japanese Jackson models, excellent guitars. Um, and Itaru Kano was in fact, I don't know the exact technical details, but he was originally employed by Kyowa Shokai. He worked on Jackson. So when Kyowa just separated from Jackson in '94, Itaru went on to found Caparison Guitars under Kyowa Shokai ownership. And obviously those guitars, quality-wise, are absolutely amazing. Um, I've always felt myself that Caparison was the next step in evolution of Jackson Japan. Um, it's maybe what could have been had the circumstances been different, with Jackson Japan in the mid '90s. Um, and that Jackson Falcon that was designed um, by Itaru became the Caparison Horus with some slight modifications, but I have them in the book. You look at them side by side, and it's essentially, you see what the inspiration is. I didn't get the insider information on that, but I'm pretty sure that Kyowa Shokai and Itaru had the IP for the design of those models, obviously, which allowed them to develop them under Caparison. There's another Charvel model that is the Charvel Questar, which is double cut, bit classic looking style, that became the Caparison Angelus. So to me, there's a real lineage there. And Comparison is doing great. They're, making absolutely fantastic guitars, all high-end stuff, to this day, really.
Right. And you know, the Japanese um craft, you know, like they all these guitars, right? All these brands, not only Jackson and Charvel, but all these brands they have, you know, the Japanese instruments, they've always been notorious, you know, for being, you know, on uh, a higher quality instrument, you know, and now you mentioned something high end custom shops and stuff like that, that we're seeing amazing things nowadays, you know, but everything is Japan. But you mentioned something about like keeping the like the standard, you know, like keeping, you know, like the word, like we're not gonna downsize or downgrade the quality of the instruments. That unfortunately, I feel that nowadays it's about profit. How can we make more money? Oh, use, you know, use less quality materials and this and that, and that's why, you know, you do find $100 guitars, $200 guitars, but also you see the quality. But there's
Yeah,
some exceptions, you know, great exceptions. But I think it goes a little bit with the culture also, you know,
mhm,
like of
yeah,
doing things right. There's a phrase in English that I use here that is, how you do one thing is how you do everything.
mhm,
So I think it's you know, applies a little bit on the you know, the craft of
yeah.
Japanese guitars.
And I
Um,
think, to be fair, also that the Japanese episode of the guitar industry has been kind of paralleled then over the years, because in the 80s, producing in Japan was, let's go to some place in Asia when we can produce for less money and, have quality guitars. And that kind of, got mirrored afterwards in Korea, and you could say today in China, where, in the beginning it's kind of sketchy, and then, it's always a question of debate, but I think a high-end guitar from Korea today is absolutely equivalent to, the high quality of Japan back in the day. Some of us still have kind of an emotional sort of thing with the made in Japan guitars, but to be absolutely fair in terms of, objective judgment of instruments, you got super high-end stuff in Korea today. So, but back to the 80s, and that's one of the things that Grover said. Um, Most companies went to Asia to produce as cheap as possible. And as you're saying, produce cheap, bring home, sell, make tons of money. And Grover, in, whatever um, margin of action he was left with in 85, said, we'll go to Japan. By definition, it's going to be cheaper than producing in the USA, but we're gonna make the best possible guitars. And I think that, in regards to Asian production at the time, was kind of revolutionary. That somebody said, okay, this allows us to produce for less money. But in his mind, he said, whatever we produce in Japan, we're going to make the best guitars possible. And we're going to make sure that those guitars are worthy of what we have built with Charvel USA. And I think that was, that certainly explains why people still love those guitars 40 years later, because they were really good quality guitars.
Yeah, I think they accomplished that. You know, the Japanese. I mean, if that was the goal, you know, we're gonna build the same quality of instrument that we build here in the U.S. Obviously, for less cost. Um, Talking about the M6 model, that was your first Charbel. Was to this day, what's your favorite model?
Oh, um, difficult to choose. Um, I can't pick one. I would say I love the Model 2,
Okay.
just because, I mean, it's the guitar.
One pickup.
one pickup, one knob. It's like
Right.
no decisions to make. You know, that is the to me, that's the ultimate rock machine. I think I've evolved over the years in the sense that in my early years, I loved like an SSH combination, like on the Model 6. I've evolved to more of an HH or SH combination, being what I really use because I don't really use the middle pickup that much.
Mhm.
So I would say some of my favorite models would be the Doug Aldrich signatures, which are just unbelievable guitars, and they look amazing. They feel amazing, reverse headstock and the fins. So that to me is probably one of my favorite models. But there's so many. I mean, the 3DR from 1988, 89. I love the Spectrum. There's so many, I mean, amazing models. It's difficult to choose, really.
Look, thank you for sharing what your favorites are. The M2, actually, I've been like procrastinating on getting an M2. I'm a fan of Andreas Kisser from Sepultura. That was his first guitar, an M2. And they just did this signature guitar with this graphic Jackson did. And I always say, like, it will be cool if Jackson or Charvel, they create a signature guitar, but with the M2 model, with
Mhm.
the graphics, with the stickers that he has on it. And, it's like you said. I think he had a Kaler tremolo, one pickup and one knob, but it's on
Mhm.
my to-do list to get that guitar. And I always chase that guitar in on a Facebook Market, and
Mhm.
the average price on that one, it's a good price, $800 that I'm seeing, 1200 on River. But yeah, definitely you having this conversation with you, it's like making me appreciate why there's been this interest on me on the Japanese guitars with
Yeah.
Charvel and Jackson. So I'm
Mhm.
gonna be doing an episode about my collection about it, but
Mhm.
definitely I think the foundation of this whole love for the brand
Yeah.
starts with your book, and it's
Wow.
definitely you put this thing out, like, that a lot of us, that I would
Mhm.
say thousands of fans for the brand, is kind of like, we appreciate it, man. We really, really appreciate the work you did with this book. um, I really appreciate your time, and I wanted to ask you, let's see, I'm not missing something here. The purpose of having this conversation with you, wanted to kind of get to know more about you, the person, the author, the publisher, in this case, you yourself. Um, do you think that, what are your expectations with the second release? Do you think might trigger to a third release?
Difficult to say. I mean, I know there's a number of people who missed the first edition who are waiting for the second edition. Um, there's it's difficult to quantify. I know there's a number of people who are waiting for the second edition to get it. I've been um, blessed really to see that some you know some legends of the industry um, are interested in the book. I mean, I'm sure you know Mike Tempesta from the artist relations at Jackson. He sent me a message the other day and he said, "Well, Mike, Shannon, and Red Dave um, are wondering when your second edition is coming out." And again, to me, it's so. I guess if I had to summarize this whole project for me, I would say grateful. just because first of all, I'm so grateful that I was able to put this book out. I mean, sometimes I look at it and like, did I do that? It's like, did I do that? Because, I look at it now with a little bit of distance, and the fact that, these guys, I got an email a few weeks back from Dan Lawrence, and he sends me an email and says, "Hi, my name is Dan Lawrence," and I'm like,
But
it's like, it's
you're
like,
like, I don't know who you are, but
it's
thank you
like
for
I
your
have a
introduction.
slight notion who you are. It says, "Oh, I'm bummed because I missed the first," and that to me is again, from a fan's perspective, it's just amazing. So to me, that summarizes, I think, all the positive aspects, around the book and the experience. To me, it's gratitude because it's just amazing. And as you said, now I'm like, in speaking terms, with a lot of these guys, and it's, to me, it's still mind blowing. I'm like a kid, which is, you
Yeah,
know,
but you know what? That was earned by you because the lot of the hard work. Not only because I know that at the end of the day you did this. We can tell that you did it out of your passion.
mm,
For the instrument, for the brand, for everything. And I like this storytelling thing. It's stuck in my head. Because it's important to tell the story.
yeah,
Someone needs to tell the story. And when you said that Robert Jackson told you in 40 years, nobody knocked on the door
yeah.
to say, "Hey, I want to tell the story." And
Well,
I think
it's to a certain degree, and I write that in the book, you know, um, storytelling is one of the main um, backbones of any tribal society. You could say any society at all, but storytelling is what keeps the memory going, you know. And one of the things about Grover is like you get him started on the subject, and he'll just, go on about the subject and then just like go on a tangent and then go on some, and then after a while just like it's like, oh, sorry, I went on, and you're sitting there with a smile on your face, the
like,
no, dude,
no, just keep
more,
going.
more,
Yeah.
but he is a great storyteller. And I think one of the things that I'm in all modesty very proud of with this book is, now that it's out, now that it's, again, I have a little bit more distance towards it, after all these years just, working in my bubble. Um, I'm I'm proud of what it is because I think I managed to achieve what I set out to do. And you might know Jim Shine. I don't know if the name sounds familiar. He's a collector and he's kind of a historian of Charvel and other brands as well. And he shared very kindly some documents for the book. And he wrote a comment on Instagram on one of my posts, and he said, you've achieved something that's really rare because you've done such a great job that you have just vaporized any need for anybody else to ever touch the subject again. And it's like,
Right.
wow, wow. But
It's kind of
it's
read the book. It's on the
mm,
book. Anything, any fact that you want. Because look, on these Facebook groups, collectors, aficionados, there's sharp people that know the story. And
mm,
like what people saying about you. It seems you know a lot about this, but
yeah,
also there's the opposite side. That misinformation and stuff like that. But if you're really, really like fan of instruments, but especially this brand, I think you did a fantastic job. My next question was, I think you already answered that. When people from Jackson Charvel are approaching
mm,
you, hey, I want to get the book.
mm,
We missed out. Um, what are your thoughts like Pat Campolotano, right? I think he's an amazing luthier. He's a great guy. I mean, he's not only someone that crafts great guitars, but also he's a great person. To me, I remember when I was at the factory when he invited me, he was like, I'm just a regular guy, man, like because I was like stuck, like I'm here in the factory, I'm talking to you. Um, Being you someone that have basically followed the brand for decades, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing right now with this new breed of luthiers that are doing amazing things on Jackson and Charvel?
Well,
What's your
I
definition of that?
think the brand, like many brands from the 80s, the brand has had quite a complicated history. Let's just say it that way, with ups and downs and things and changes and whatnot. Some happy times, some less happy times and whatnot. Um, and for people involved in the original story, like Grover and and Tim and others, there's obviously an emotional kind of perception of the history that is deeply personal and that we as outsiders may not see the thing in the same way. But what I would say is today when, anyone buys a guitar anywhere that, has a Concord headstock and says Jackson or Charvel, they are still buying the dream that Grover created. It all comes from there. If the brand was different, if the guitars could be amazing, but it would not hit the same. So I think that, is no matter what, people may feel about the history, how it went, what is being done, what was done, what is being done now, whatever. One thing remains is that that brand is just mythical. That's one thing. Um, I'm not so familiar with the modern stuff. I do have the feeling that the guys working on it now, Pat's team and and Mike, I mean he's one of the originals as well, and Red Dave. I feel they're honoring, the legacy and putting out some great stuff. As I mentioned, I got a quick exchange with John Romanowski a couple of months back. He got a couple of books. And I said to him, there's stuff in new production, um, like the American series they've put out, the with the Randy Rhoads, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of guitars that I think
Mhm.
are exceptional. Then, of course, to me, there's always this thing where I see a Jackson headstock, and if I don't see, a trapezoidal truss rod cover on the thing,
Mhm.
it feels weird. So it's one of those things where I get it, why it's not there. How it's done now, it's probably better. But that's the same emotionally, and the neck joint is the same. So there's like personal tastes of
Yeah.
stuff you like more or less. But I think, they're still putting out some great quality doing stuff. And man, Tim said the same thing. He said, over the years, the brand maybe didn't go always the way I thought it would or would have liked it to would, but said, I think it's just amazing to think that so many years later, that brand is still a major, actor of the history. And I know Grover personally is still, as he should be, extremely proud that the Randy Rhoads guitar is
Exactly.
it's it's one of the most iconic guitars in history,
It is.
as is the headstock, and nobody can take that away. So I think it's fantastic that you have new generations now
I'm, I'm,
still
I always
passionate.
want to, sorry to interrupt you. I always wondering, like, what Grover Jackson thinks or feels when he sees that headstock. He sees the Jackson logo in, like you mentioned, the Randy Rhoads guitar, which is an like, it's like you said, it's part of history, you know, like that instrument is part of, as equally as important as the other instruments that are, you know, in the music history.
Mm-mm,
So I forgot to ask you this question. I know you approached to Grover Jackson and different other, you know,
mm,
people part of the story. Did
yeah,
you approach the Charvel family? The I think it's the son now, right?
Michael.
Any of the
Michael.
Charvel people?
I didn't for one very simple reason. Um, has nothing to do with the book.
Right.
The book
Japan.
tells the story of Charvel Japan between 1985 and 2011,
Right.
and the Charvel family never had anything to do with it.
Right.
Simple as that.
Thank you for. I'm glad you asked this question because I'm sure people might say why they're not. Because for the ones that know the story,
Mhm,
Grover Jackson acquired Charvel,
mhm,
and basically Grover Jackson is the one that you know move forward the
mhm.
Charvel Jackson. So yeah, it makes sense. But I wanted to ask just
Well, I mean, again, the early history of the brand can be a bit of a minefield. There's literally probably not a week that goes by without me witnessing some bloody exchange on internet of, who was good, who was bad, who did.
right,
And when there's like emotional history involved, we may never ever have a completely objective, relation of events or whatnot. But as I said, I'm interested in sharing story, in bringing something, in celebrating something. I'm not interested in drama. I'm not against anyone or for anyone. I think as soon as if you do work as a journalist, as an essayist, if you write books, whatever, as soon as you inject kind of uh, um, subjective values or judgments about things or people, you lose credibility
right,
because you pick a side. It's not about picking sides. Nobody's perfect. We try to tell the story the best way we can, and the way that can be documented, and that's it.
yeah. And
That's
look,
the most thing.
sorry to interrupt. I always choose keywords, and now you just said celebrating,
Uh-uh,
celebrating the you know the brand,
uh-uh,
the legacy, because it's what it is. You know, it's something that is part of the the history now. And I
uh-uh,
think celebrating is the word, and I think you're honoring that through your book. And
uh-uh.
definitely, I mean, it's something that started, you know, through the pandemic, correct?
Yeah.
Do you think that changing the subject a little bit, that sometimes like certain situations that create some kind of contraction in our lives
Mm,
squeeze things out of us
yeah.
to to do greater things? Because
Well, yeah.
I think
I think, I think what happens, as I said, when everything's fine, smooth, you're comfortable, blah, you don't have the drive maybe to do something unexpected or crazy, whatnot. And again, when I launched this book project, when I started, it was a crazy idea, let's face it. Um, but I thought, and funnily enough, I thought a lot about Steve Vai during this whole process. One of the things that, of course, he said many times in interviews about the best advice that Frank Zappa ever gave him was keep your publishing. So that was like he was like, okay, so I'm self-publishing. But also he's talked a number of times about when he was working on Passion and Warfare. And of course, now looking back, you think, yeah, of course. But he said, when he was doing that, he had no idea anybody would be interested in listening to that weird music. But he made the album he wanted. And then, as they say, the rest is history, right? And I think the key to a success to a creative project is one to not be encumbered by, oh, I need to do this to please XYZ. Oh, I need to do that to sell how much, because all of that screws up the creative process. So the first thing you have to do is be completely free to do what you think, how you think it should be done, etc., etc. Of course, it's a lot of work, it's risk, it's whatever. But many times I've thought, if I don't believe in me, who will? It's the
Right.
thing, and you just
Starts with you, right?
yeah, you just go and put it out there. And I think that element, transpires through the work, whatever it is, if it's, music, book, whatever, whatever. I think people can feel that on the other end.
I feel it. Like to me, when I receive, well, the whole interaction with you, man, you've been such a great man, person. Haven't got the chance to meet in person. Hopefully, one day, either there,
Mhm.
here, whatever happens first.
Yeah.
But I think you have that, and it's something that comes with the person that you are, and
Mhm.
just like again going back to what I said, how you do one thing is how you do everything. One of the things that make your book unique, man, it's the message that you put on the book, to put out on the book. uh,
Mhm.
I think you did that for everybody, right? Because oh, well,
Yeah, I
somebody,
did. I did that. So, going back to my thought, it's like I always try to be, glass half full and not glass half empty.
right.
So when I thought, okay, I'm going to put out this book, I don't know if it's going to sell. I don't know if anybody's going to be interested. I mean, right, now it's easy for me to say, oh, it was going to work. But, a year ago, I had no idea what was going to happen.
Were you
If
scared?
maybe all that investment was going to down the pit or whatnot. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put out 300 copies reasonably. I don't know how long it's going to take. I should be able to sell them, but, I don't know. And I said, okay, it's a limited edition. What makes the limited edition? Of course, it's the
Hey,
object of the thing itself, but then it's the experience around it. So
right.
that's when I started thinking, okay, so I thought, okay, they're all going to be numbered, but then they're all going to be personally dedicated, to the person. And then I got, okay, going with the Japanese things, I purchased some Japanese rubber stamps from Japan.
Right.
Uh, and I started stamping the thing, and again, this whole thing. And then I thought, okay, um, that's when I came up with the idea for the bookmarks as well, because that was a Japanese cultural thing, and I made them myself. Like, I didn't have enough work, so I started making bookmarks by hand, one by one.
Well, I'll tell you
So,
this, buying your book to me was an experience. It was an
mm,
experience, receiving the book,
not bad. Yeah.
reading your message, like the packaging, how you like how it was packed.
Mhm.
Like you packed it like it was like crystals going in the, and probably for you it was like that. I never seen, look, I have a few items, I'm a collector. I never received anything packaged that way, like with that
Yeah.
attention to detail. And
Well, I
it's
mean, the wrapping thing is, I thought, okay, and that goes back to details. It's like, okay, you've done the book, this, that, do the bookmark. I thought that was like a nice touch. I put a little, thing to explain what that was. To me, it was part of, again, inscribing that in some bits of Japanese culture and things. And I thought, okay, maybe people are not interested, maybe whatever. Um, Funnily enough, a lot of people have said, wow, the bookmarks were really nice and stuff, whatever. So that was part of it. And I thought, okay, I'm going to wrap the book, and said, okay, regular paper, craft paper. And I ended up buying rolls of, that colored craft paper that is usually used by the florists to wrap the
okay.
bouquets. So I used that, and I figured, okay, I'll put a stamp on there. It was just a thing, because to me it was part of the notion of doing a limited edition is it needs to have something special.
It was a
That's when
very, like, the attention to detail was very thoughtful, man. And thank you for that. it makes us
Mm-mm.
feel special. So um, I know that on the second release, they're gonna get 18 more pages, right?
Yeah. So the second release, which the printer told me it's probably going to be a couple of days late, but I think end of the month. Um, so the second release um, does not have the personal dedication and the stuff because now it's like a normal edition, but it does have 18 more pages of pictures because I managed to score a few relatively rare guitars after the book was first published. So I photographed them, and those will be in the second edition. The text and the content is exactly the same, but yeah, there's 18 more pages of pictures. So
Talking
I
about
mean,
pictures.
reasonably, the book was not fat enough, so I thought, okay, let's add some pages.
Okay, talking about pictures, and you did mention throughout this conversation, but majority of these pictures are, you said that are yours, right?
Well, in the book, all the photos that you see with the kind of grayish, cloudy background,
Right.
those were shot in my office.
Okay.
Um, and then there's a number of pictures that I've used from guitars that I've sold over the years. Um, but yeah, I mean, in the book, whenever the photo was taken by somebody else, they are credited
Oh,
as
okay.
as they should in the caption.
Oh, okay. So many people share pictures with you.
Well, at some point, I thought, okay, I can't possibly. There's a lot of guitars that I purchased over the last, few years to include in the book. But at some point, it's like, because of budget and physical limitations, I couldn't possibly buy every single guitar,
Exactly.
um, in the world. So I connected with a lot of people that I had sold guitars to, and I said, hey, would you, share pictures? And there's a number of people who very kindly shared, pictures of guitars I didn't have. I mean, I didn't have any pointies, stuff like that. Just there's also basses. While I was preparing the book, I got messages from people saying, are there going to be basses in the book? Because bassists, are always the poor parent. You have guitars and no basses. So I tried to put as many basses as you could as well in the book. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So Christian, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate, your willingness to talk to me. Same
my
as,
pleasure, man.
same to me is like the reason I created this channel is that, to share a passion, to share this love for instruments, fine instruments, but also to talk to people that have that same feeling, collectors, luthiers, guitar players, that we have this thing in common, like, which is music, because we started, talking about, why music, why rock, why heavy metal, why, and that's what get us together, because we are a community. Um, we you mentioned that earlier, like, in the 80s it felt more like a community, going to a concert. And I think hopefully we get back, but that's my purpose of creating this platform, so people like myself had a chance to, talk to someone like you and hear your story. And I know in 3 hours that we're talking, it's hard to cover decades of the
Wow.
person that you became. It was a
Yeah.
great conversation,
No, it was great. I mean, I very much appreciate, the chat, and it was very kind of you to invite me. Um, I do think, as I said, the main thing that I take out of this experience is gratitude. And to your point, I found it very moving to see just how many people around the world have the same emotion, the same feeling, the same love for these guitars. And I would say, in these days more than ever, I think it's important to point out the things that bring us together,
right?
you
It
know.
is. It is, because look, talking to you, hearing, the stories you share with us. I mean, makes me feel normal. It's like there
Yeah.
is more people out there that has exactly the same feelings, had similar experiences, and we
Mm.
all have our own journey, and what you do and what I do, in the different parts of the world where we live. But I think this, like, we have the same passion about the same
Mm.
things, and that's why kind of like your book connects us, like it's
Yeah.
like, okay, it's a cool thing to have. It's not just it's not a collectible. It's kind of
Yeah.
like something that needed to be told, needed to be said, and I think you did a
And he reflects a number of things. I made the decision very early on to not use any sort of AI in the production of this book, not in the writing, not in the correction, not, absolutely nothing. I mean, I went as far as to turn off all the AI functions in Word because, you know, that's also why I decided book, because maybe a generational thing, but I think, a book is tactile, is something, it's an object. There's a weight to it. And by no means,
that's
by no means am I, arrogant in thinking that, I've left a book for centuries to come. But I think it still has that value to have the object, to look at a book, to read stuff. And, all of it is 100% human in the book, which I
again.
thought made sense.
I'm glad you mentioned the AI. Actually, I had in one of my last questions about what your thoughts about AI nowadays, and how how things are being used. I'm not against like technology, because it's kind of like saying I don't want internet. You and me, we're
Yeah.
talking because of the internet, but I
Mhm.
think the key element that you just mentioned, the human part, I think it was the right call from you, approaching it that way, like no
Yeah.
AI involved, because I think that's why I think one of the reasons, because there's many reasons that your book is successfully received. I
Mhm.
think I believe in energy, man, and I think everything was done like the way you wrap the book, like intentionally done, like, and I think that's why you're getting this,
But yeah, it's a question. I think it's, when you're creating something that is unnecessary, it's a question of honesty. Um, you know, AI in itself is so generic, it doesn't mean anything. You can use AI for many things. I was talking to a screenwriter in New York the other day, and I said, if you have a company and you need to sell, you need to create a user manual for a dishwasher, you know, just put the spec sheet, feed it to the AI. You need to translate it to 15 different languages. By all means, there's no creative value to a user's manual for a dishwasher. All you need to achieve is for the person who gets the stuff to know how it works. That's it.
right,
So there's nothing wrong with it.
right,
But if you're,
cool,
if you're a storyteller, if you're a write, journalist, you write essays, you write books, if you use AI, that means either that you're not capable enough
right.
or that you're lazy. So in any case, to me, it's dishonest. And if there are some flaws in whatever is created, that's part of being human. Otherwise, what's the point? You know?
You know what? Um, Thank you for that input about AI, because it is that, and I think like right now you use this word honesty.
Mhm.
Like if you're writing something, I mean, there's a lot of people that don't even take the time to write a proper email anymore. They just ask
Mhm.
AI to write the email.
Yeah.
And look, I negotiate for a living, and I text email for a living, and this and that. And like I train people also, and I remember having this agent that was training last year, and he's like, she's not responding to me, she's not responding to me. And I said, send me the screenshot what you wrote to her, send me the conversation. And I told him, did you use AI for this?
Mhm.
And he said, yes. That's why she's not responding, because I can tell it's AI. It's not
Mhm.
you. It's not, it's there's no soul on your asking. You being like a robot there, and
Mhm.
people don't want to work with robots.
Yeah.
But at the same time, AI is a tool.
Yeah.
There's things that make it's like the internet. Make things life easier. But I think a lot of people are afraid of, oh, AI is taking our jobs. Um,
It's a question, it's a tool. It's a screwdriver.
right.
If you use a screwdriver, to fix a door, it's good. If you stick it in someone's head, not so good. So that's to me, that's what it is. And unfortunately, I think the look, for those
That
of
was a
us
great
who
analogy, man. That was a great one.
for those of us who loved, like science fiction from, the 50s and 60s, there were the same discussions about robotics. And the whole point was to alleviate humans of shitty tasks, repetitive stuff that has no creative value or whatever, and have, back then it was the robots, today it could be AI, handle that. So we are free to do more creative stuff. And but that's I guess the idealistic way to look at it. And in that sense, AI is great. But now when you're too lazy to get off your butt and say, hey, AI, take care of things for me and do this and write the stuff because I'm just too lazy to do it. And but then, that's to me, that's it's the use of the tool that to me is based, depending on who it is, on greed and laziness. And I think those are have never been positive, motors for any kind of progress.
Yeah.
So
And once again, thanks for your input because AI is here. It's something that is part of our lives now. And just adding to what you just said about it, or I love the analogy. If the
the
screwdriver,
screwdriver.
it's a tool, but you stick it in someone's head, it's not good. The same thing goes with AI, but it goes also to like this kind of like we need to be aware of things. What's our disposal and how we're going to use it. You use it for good or you use it for bad. But there's something that I learned in a seminar 2 years ago that I was trying to understand what's AI, what's happening, And I remember this instructor or this presenter, he said, AI is not gonna take your job. People who know how to use AI is the one that's gonna take your job. It's kind of like how to use it because it's not gonna replace the human. And I shared that example on my industry, right? And AI cannot write the book that you just wrote. Like you published this book, and there is things that AI cannot do it, but it is a tool that
Yeah.
if you're responsible, honest, have ethics in this, you might use it correctly.
Yeah.
If not,
So some of the funny yet aggravating things that I've seen lately on the internet is, sometimes on guitar pages, on Facebook, whatever, somebody wants to find out about this, that model, whatever, and they ask, ChatGPT or Grok or whoever. And some of the responses, it's like, Jesus,
idiotic.
like, like people can't manage to be sometimes dumb enough by themselves. They now we have AI to tell them, oh, this guitar was built in such year and it's this and that. You look at it and you think, what? Where does that go? But the danger in that, and I think that's why I hope this book, finds its public is, somebody asks a question to AI about something, AI comes up with a completely ridiculous answer. But if it gets repeated enough,
Becomes
someone will end up believing that's the actual stuff, and there's no, there's no documentation or nothing that can set the record straight. So that's why I like books, because on the internet, it's here today, gone tomorrow, and so
right.
it's all very ultimately superficial most of the times.
I like what you said. That's why. That's what I like books. and yeah, like to me, um, I came here to this country in 2000 to stay for the final time, 2005, and I used to read 1 hour a day. In
Mhm.
2006, I started reading books, and I did it out of necessity. I was trying to get back on
Mhm.
my feet, move from Ecuador, starting from scratch at 27, and those books saved me. And
Mhm.
now I think I was like, why is it so hard for me to read a book? And I've been using the timer that, okay, let's do 30 minutes. Just focus on reading and read. And my answer is why? Is because you have so many distractions now that you didn't have 20 years ago. The internet, the scrolling, the whole thing, so much information and distractions that get you out of a simple habit that is reading a book. And I've been reading the brothers book from the Van Halen brothers. Alex Van Halen wrote that book about the relationship. I'm 75% done with the book, and I feel proud of that I'm reading that book just for the fact that I'm reading, and definitely your book, it's on my to-do list. But for this year, I want to read this book, and I know that I'm going to enjoy it because um, it's part of what I like, what I'm passionate about. But Christian, I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
It was great, man.
And
Very, very, very kind of you to have me
no,
ramble on about my adventures.
look, and I know people are going to enjoy this. This is first podcast that I kind of like had the same feeling of having just a conversation. As I mentioned, I have my other podcast, Rocking the State. It's in Spanish and it's for South America. And the episodes are long, 3 hours, 4 hours, and they are asking me like, who's gonna watch this, man? This is so long. And there's people write me, hey, it took me 3 days, but I finished it. I enjoy it. Thank you for putting it out. There's people that wrote me, hey, I went straight. I didn't sleep, but I watch it, and I know that's going to happen with this episode. Appreciate you're part of this community, and for the people that I want to ask you one last question. Um,
Yep.
what would you tell the young Christian that was in New York when an exchange? When you were in those days that you were, buying this Model 6 guitar at Samash, and you were in New York, knowing what you know now, what you've been through, your life. If you run into Christian, would you tell him
Mhm.
something, or do you would just pass him and not say anything?
Um, Probably something to the extent of run, Forest, run. Kind of thing. I mean, if I had known when I was 20 something, if I had known everything good and bad that I know now, I think my brain would have exploded. So, it's there's a time for everything. I was once young and slightly dumb. I'm now less young and slightly dumb. But I think it's a journey, man. So there's no shortcuts. Eventually, and I've seen that in my uh, daytime job as well. When you come across people who have um, real texture and have something interesting to share and who can be, in their own way fascinating or interesting or surprising or whatnot, the path is never straight. It's the most interesting people have had incredible winding roads and ups and downs and things, because that's what teaches you as a person and as a human being. And that's the value of life. It's you know even learning and keeping the positive even from the negative things that at the time are painful, but don't dwell on it. Just think about it and you know pick the lessons from it and move forward. So I don't think, I don't think I would have necessarily done anything differently. It's brought me here. So, you know,
Great answer, man. Great answer, and I take it, to heart, because one of the things that I feel blessed of creating this, a space like this is, talking to someone like you. You're not just a regular guy. You're a creator. You're someone that right now, like I told you at the beginning, you put yourself on the map with this book, and not just trying to get like out of notoriety of you did it because from your heart, and the
yeah.
result is this book that I highly recommend everybody on the second release. I don't know what's going on as far as like pre-sales and the stuff, but if you're a Charvel, Jackson, or just a guitar aficionado, I highly recommend you to get this book. How can they get the book, by the way?
So the only channel of sale for this book is my website.
Okay.
And then um, as soon as the book is out, I will obviously communicate on Instagram and through the newsletter I have on the website and probably Facebook as well. I don't have the exact date yet. It's going to be end April. I'm not exactly sure the day, but as soon as it's announced, it is. Then, people will be able to buy it directly through my website. Very simple, just click on the thing, takes you to PayPal, and that's super easy. Of course, there's a lot of people I'm in touch directly through email now because of many reasons and stuff. Somebody drops me an email saying, "Hey, can I get your book, whatever?" And I can ship it direct. I'm a one-man army.
Okay.
So,
One man operation.
I get the books, I pack the books, I ship the books. It's
Yeah.
there's nobody else, So,
This is the original custom shop, custom made book. It's done
yeah,
everything. So you're gonna get a
yeah.
custom shop. And you guys, if you're watching this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, follow Christian on his Instagram. We're gonna put the links here for the website, his social media platforms, and don't miss out. I missed out the book, but it happens that I was able to manage, to contact Christian, and I got one book. And anything else that you would like to say, Christian, before we end this amazing conversation, man? Appreciate your time.
No, I really appreciate the invitation. I mean, you're obviously going to achieve making me blush again at the beginning and now at the end. So, but yeah, I'm super grateful for everything around this project, all the interactions, all the feedback, all the people I talked to. Everything has been so absolutely positive. And to be honest, before I launched the book, I kind of prepared myself. I thought, okay, this is the age of the internet, so I'm probably going to get, shit comments and stuff and what. And I kind of, prepared myself and said, okay, if you get shit, ignore it. Don't follow that. And I haven't. I mean, everything has been so absolutely amazing. The feedback, the support, the comments. I know people have sent me threads on different forums and stuff, people talking about the book. Again, I'm just so absolutely grateful for the whole experience, for the amazing human interactions and, you know, conversations like this, because the world feels a bit smaller and closer when we actually, ramble on for hours about subjects like this, and you realize that there's, again, things that bring us together that should mean more than the stuff that, takes us apart. So,
Man, thank you for sharing your last words. Amazing how you put it together, that coming together, and that's what it is. Like I think you achieved that, and I'm sorry to be redundant on that, but I think you achieved that with your book, and I wish you all the good luck with the second release. I have no doubts that it's going to be a successful second release. It's going to be sold out very soon. So you guys don't miss out the book. We're going to have all the links here. Reach out to Christian, get your book, and I'll see you next week.
thanks a
Christian,
lot, man.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you
Thanks.
from the bottom
Thanks
of my
a lot,
heart. And I look forward to one day meeting you either in Paris or France where you live or here in Los Angeles, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, man.
Appreciate it.
Very kind of you.